Welcome to the Simply Wild podcast. I am your host, Sadie Jane, and we are coming back to the wild within us with every episode. Man, today we have a special treat, a special gift, and something that I really don't take lightly. My beloved brother and friend, Hugh Vail, is here with us to speak his story of accountability, to speak his story and his medicine and how he has come back to the wild within him. Hugh, thank you so much for joining me.
It's good to be here.
I am so grateful. You know, I'm going to pull up your bio just so everyone knows who you are. But even before I get into the bio, I just have to share how we know each other. Hugh came into my life in a time where I was not allowing any other masculine energies in. I had just learned some really pivotal lessons, as you guys know if you've been listening to my story, about the masculine. And I found Hugh, I'm not even really sure how, just some cowboy on the internet. And we started conversing and he invited me to come, him and Jeff and I, to come swim horses with him. And immediately there's something special about your energy and our connection. And then not even maybe a week later, you reach out to me and said, Sadie, I need to show you something. I need you to come to St. George with me. And I was like, okay, I'm here for this. So that really began a lifelong friendship, family relationship. You became interwoven into our family. My kids love you. Jeff and you are brothers and friends. But what transpired is you sent me to this ranch. We went to this ranch, to this random private ranch in the middle of nowhere, southern Utah. And you said, Sadie, we're supposed to host retreats here. Like we're supposed to do work here. And we do that together. And Hugh and I get to weave our magic together through Simply Wild Medicina, where he actually gets to, or I get to enjoy and honor his medicine and magic through Mustang Medicine, which I'll share with you when I talk about his bio. But you also host many retreats there. And it's a place you call home and a place where you get to share your medicine. And I will forever be grateful for that invitation, Hugh, forever.
Do you remember the first thing you said to me when I extended that invite out?
No.
You said, what's your human design?
Oh.
We have this on DMs and Instagram.
And
I was
sense.
like, my what?
Yeah.
And you said, oh, yeah, I don't do anything with anybody until I know their human design.
Yes.
I don't know if that's still a hard and fast rule that you live by, but
yeah,
I downloaded the app. I had no idea. And, I plugged in the information and then I sent it over to you and you were like, okay, I know who you are. And I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, it made sense. You're an emotional projector. I'll never forget it. In fact, I think I can see your design now. Yeah, it's important. It was so funny that you remember that.
Yeah. Because I actually really like human design now.
Yeah.
I'm not as fluent in it, as others are, but generally speaking, I'm like, that's actually really accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. And projectors, first of all, being extended an invite, I was like, it's so interesting. And it was interesting going on a little bit of human design tangent. It was interesting how you wanted one-on-one time with me to officially, formally invite me. I invite you to this space. That's why I was like, wait, you're catching on something you don't even know exists.
Yeah.
Because we love our invitations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so powerful to be recognized, especially as projectors in that way and as guides and teachers. And I had a feeling, I was like, I bet you're a projector, because the way that you guide, the way that you teach, the way that your aura penetrates, the way that you're able to channel through what you do and even connections with your horses. So we have a lot of projector power on the podcast today. I love that was what I still do that to this day. I'm like, you want to work with me? Okay. What's your human design? Mm-hmm. It just is such a beautiful physical representation of even just the unconsciousness of what they're putting out. There's so much interweaved, especially when you're looking at the connection between each other. Yeah. So powerful. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm just going to read your bio just so you can know, because then we're going to start weaving this really beautiful story about who you are. In 2015, Hugh began volunteering for an organization that rescues children from child sex trafficking, and a year later became the director of social influence for Operation Underground Railroad, directly working and traveling with the CEO for nearly 3 years. In 2018, Hugh co-founded Mustang Medicine, an organization that hosts 4-day rewilding immersives to awaken guests to a formula that empowers people to heal their own emotional wounds and traumas and fully embrace their wholeness. The 4-day rewilding immersive experience utilizes ancient wisdom, ceremonies, and leading science with expert facilitators. Before I go even further, any further, I invite everybody who's listening. You might not even know why I asked you to be on. And honestly, what's interesting about what's happening right now in the climate of the discussion that we're going to be talking about today is even before that, my intention to have you on the podcast was always there. I'm like, I have to have Hugh on. I want to talk about our story, how we found each other, the weaving of our workings together. And then you and I discussed some things that we'll obviously talk more about later in the podcast. And it just felt right for both of us to have this conversation and to, for the first time ever, talk about your story that's weaved really into your bio. Talk about your story of your experience with O.U.R. that has now led you to your medicine today. So I invite anyone listening to come in with an open heart, and also to come in with a dedication that you'll listen all the way through. Because this story is a story weaved with years, not even years, lifetimes of experiences to get us to where we are now, to find our wholeness within us, which Hugh will so beautifully and eloquently speak on today. So with that, Hugh, I know you through Mustang Medicine, through the medicine of teaching about surrender, about forgiveness, through one of our most greatest gifted creations, the horse. So why don't you talk about what that is? What is Mustang Medicine? And we'll go from there.
Years prior to starting Mustang Medicine, I was tasked on a project, and I think the aim or the target of the project that I was tasked on was, this is how it was defined to me. Because this is going back into the O.U.R. days. When you're looking at the issue of child trafficking or any modern day slavery, William Wilberforce is somebody I think everybody should know. I think they should read his biography written by Eric Metaxas. The biography is called Amazing Grace. One of Wilberforce's mentors was the guy who wrote Amazing Grace, and he was a politician who is credited with the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade over in Europe. Decades later, Abraham Lincoln said that he wished every little schoolboy and every little schoolgirl would know the name and the history of William Wilberforce. And I say that because this project that I was tasked with, along with a couple other individuals, was to figure out, how do you change the hearts and the minds of the people? And I'll try to provide some context to that, because when you're living in a culture that slavery exists, really hard things are happening to people. And interestingly enough, and I haven't looked at the recent data in years, but the data that I remember at last that I was reading it is about 50% of children that are trafficked cannot return home because they were trafficked from home. That's 50%. So 1 in every 2 children. That's that's a significant problem within the home. And there's driving forces behind that. The other statistic that I found really interesting is over 90% of traffickers were trafficked. And this is, I think when you sum it up, is like hurt people, right? And so trafficked children grow up and trafficked children, because that's the world and the culture that they're raised in. Culture is very, very challenging to change, because culture is not what we see, it's what we look through. Franklin Covey had a business partner, and his business partner was named Hiram Smith. And Hiram Smith, decades ago, gave this incredible speech where he talked about, he painted this metaphorical picture that each of us has this glass window right in front of our face, and we don't even see that it's there. It's like having a pair of glasses on. And Hiram was teaching his business clients and the world, right? Because this was a public recording that he had done. And he said, on this window, each of us has dozens and dozens, potentially hundreds of principles that are inscribed on this window. And you picked them up so long ago that you don't even see them anymore. And the example that he gave was, let's say you have somebody who comes walking around the corner and this pit bull comes, he's loose. And the pit bull looks ferocious. He's got that big square blocky head. And somebody who has a belief on them that dogs are vicious or pit bulls are man killers, that person has this reaction in their body where they're going to run, they're going to jump over fences, they'll climb tall buildings, they'll do whatever they have to do to get away from this pit bull, right? And this pit bull could be Cesar Millan's personal pit bull. If you ever watched the Dog Whisperer, he always walks around with his big pit bull who's like the nicest little.
Right.
And so inside of our bodies and the way that we see the world is we're looking through the culture in which we've developed, in which we've grown, and the environment has inscribed on us and these beliefs that we've picked up. And we oftentimes don't even realize these beliefs. In fact, Bruce Lipton, the author of The Biology of Belief, is another fantastic book that I recommend everyone read. It says that the data, the social science data, is that 95% of all of our behaviors are coming from subconscious beliefs, meaning we're not even aware that we believe these things. So the person walking around the corner and sees a pit bull and all of a sudden they panic and they're jumping over fences. It's not because necessarily that dog was worth that kind of reaction. It's because they have a belief in them. And so these really hard things happen to people, and we inscribe these beliefs, and from there we're not even conscious or aware of these core beliefs that we have. And some of them are very, very positive, and some of them are difficult. I call them core wounded beliefs. And if you have core wounded beliefs, you also have core whole beliefs. And great things come from our core whole beliefs. And we also run around and hurt people accidentally and not even realize what's really happening. I know I've done that because of core wounded beliefs. So trying to bring that back around, if I'm on a project and the aim of the project is to change the hearts and the minds of the people, the first question is, okay, well, what are we changing them to? And what we decided on, and actually I don't think I was a part of the decision looking back on it. It was more just, we got to change the hearts and the minds of the people. And I presented a question, which was, how do you change the hearts and the minds of the people? That feels like really broad stroke to solve a problem that doesn't even feel very clear.
Yeah. And the intention there is so pure,
Yes.
but it's also so broad.
It's
so
so
it's
broad,
like-
and it needs focus.
Yeah.
And so the target or the aim of it became change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts, which implies that what we're changing the minds and the hearts of the people is from being hardened. So then the question is, well, then what hardened your heart?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a ton of things that are just hard for us.
Well, it's such a blanket statement there too. It's like,
Right.
where do you start?
Right. Yeah. And so you're trying to change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. Fast forward about 3 years later, and I end up starting Mustang Medicine, which was a continuation of that aim. And my thought was, I need to get this focused. And I used a really dear friend of mine, Derek McLaughlin. We met each other in like 7th grade. His mother was like my surrogate mother. She took me under her wing and just amazing. And Derek and I we just hung out last night. Like,
Love.
yeah. So, we sat down at a whiteboard and we outlined this. This is so interesting. This is coming up this morning. I found a picture
Of the whiteboard.
and
Wait,
sent
when
it
was
to
the
Derek.
whiteboard created?
Oh gosh, this would have been like 2016.
No way.
Yeah, 2017, somewhere in the transition maybe of those 2 years.
Okay.
Somewhere in that time frame. I'd have to go look at it, but I found that this is crazy. I haven't looked at that picture of that whiteboard
You found a picture of it today?
this morning
Of course you did.
and sent it to him.
Wow.
This morning.
Wow. Okay, so tell me what was on the whiteboard.
So what was on the whiteboard was our first attempt to try to get clarity on if you're trying to change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts, how do we take that broad stroke and start getting a more fine-tuned brush on that,
right,
and really looking at it. So it's a list of some of the difficulties that people would go through, and could basically, what are some of the high points that would harden the heart. And then we also had a list on there of people that we thought, I think there was a list of 15 people that we thought would be really good Sherpas. We came up with this metaphor. I have this terribly drawn mountain on the whiteboard of like people hiking up.
Carriers of the word, essentially.
Yeah. And so it's like we're all on this journey to our summit.
Yes.
And you need Sherpas, and they're not going to hike for you, but they'll help you carry your gear, and they'll help you understand what gear you need to take and how to use the gear. I read a lot of books on, one of my favorite books is called High Exposure by a guy named David Brashears. And he was on the Everest expedition in 1996, if I remember, where it was like, at the time, it was the most deadly. There was all these hikers that had died because they got caught up in this storm. But he tells the whole journey of how you start at base camp, move up to advanced base camp, and then these different camps along the way, and then you make your final push to the summit. Yeah. And you have these Sherpas that like help set up camp. And, these guys can carry like 100 pounds on their back when oxygen's 30%, thinned than what it is down here. And
they're used to it. They like
so
know the climate.
to it.
So these Sherpas, they are helping these people get to this Everest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is on the whiteboard. It's this concept of, so then it's like, well, what makes this difficult to get to your own summit? And that was the first, like.
So was this whiteboard created when you were first introduced to this concept with this company who we'll talk more about? Yeah. You and Derek were like, okay, let's brainstorm. How do we actualize this?
Yeah, because, I was on this project with the founder and CEO of Operation Underground Railroad. And he had a theory and a hypothesis of how you change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. I didn't understand the theory. Most of it had come from a book that he had written called The Covenant. And, I thought he was just a guy who was rescuing kids. Like, I thought that was his focus and his aim. And actually, what I learned after spending a couple years with him is that I personally believe his genius is in this whole hypothesis behind the covenant. And anyone can go read the book. I think it's actually probably worth the read.
And this is Tim Ballard we're talking about.
Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but however, where we did begin, as I got more and more educated on what he was thinking, I don't think that, I think his book was a ancillary support to changing the hearts and the minds of the people, but I don't think it was a focused aim that could actually accomplish that.
Right. Which is another reason why he created O.U.R. Yes.
Yeah, I think those two things, I think he created, I mean, these are from the conversations I had with him, is that the story he told me was that one day he was listening to Glenn Beck on the radio, and he had already known Glenn, and if I recall correctly, he had actually been on Glenn's show. And the reason that he had been on Glenn's show was because of this book called The Covenant.
Interesting.
And so The Covenant, if people do their homework, this has been with Tim for a long time. Yeah. And Glenn had somehow gotten the book, read the book, contacted Tim, and said, I really love this. I love this concept, and I love this hypothesis, and I think it's really, really important that people know, and I'd like to have you on my show. And there begins this relationship between Glenn and Tim. And one day, Tim's in traffic, and he's listening to the Glenn Beck show, and Glenn starts talking about this horrible issue of human trafficking. And Glenn has no idea that Tim is working for Homeland Security in this capacity of trying to combat, human trafficking. And so Tim reaches out to Glenn and says, hey, I know I wrote the book and I've been on your show because of this book. However, the thing I do to pay my bills is I work for Homeland Security in this area. And Tim had presented an idea. I think it was over a phone call. And he said, I actually think that there needs to be an organization. It could be a nonprofit organization or a for-profit organization, but there needs to be an organization that exists between the trafficking and the government agencies, like the traffickers and the government agencies. And in between that, there could be an organization which would be able to go do things that the government can't go do because there's laws and different things like that. And so and Glenn was like, as far as the stories that I had heard, and Glenn was like, yeah, cool, that sounds great. Okay. And Tim was like, I can get that organization. And Glenn was like, okay, then stand it up and then let's go. And from there, Glenn started promoting it, and they, already had a relationship behind it. So I think actually O.U.R. Is an unexpected success that Tim has no idea how big and how powerful that message is going to resonate in the hearts of the people.
Mm-hmm. And at that point for sure.
In time.
Yeah.
And this is like 2012-ish.
Yeah, I was going to ask, this is the beginning. Mm-hmm. And you got involved what year?
2015.
15. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it had been going on, and I had heard about it just kind of ancillary here and there. And actually what happened was one day I got a random message on LinkedIn from a guy who, his name is Ryan Welch, And this guy finds this is his story. He finds my LinkedIn page, my profile.
Yeah.
And he says, I need to invite that guy to come to a private screening of the documentary called The Abolitionist, which was the first documentary that was going to talk and promote this whole story.
So did your LinkedIn have something on there that said, or was it just the energy?
It was.
He was just like,
the way
this is
he
the guy.
describes it. It was just the energy.
What did your LinkedIn say?
Oh, I have something about software.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I haven't even been logged into that.
Right. What's LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, please don't ever make me log back into LinkedIn. And,
wow.
And so, that was kind of the beginning of it. So I had a couple buddies, Derek being one of them, and a few others. And I got a couple of tickets. There's no reason that I should have, there's no logical reason that this conversation should be happening, or that I have any influence there's nothing that implies that I have a lot of influence or anything. Literally, this guy's like, you should come. And so I'm like, I'll go see this movie. My first initial thought was, there's no way that child trafficking is a thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I was so naive. I mean, I look at it now and I look back and I'm like, that's a very naive thing. But I guess that's just because of the contrast of how much information that I understand today about that issue. But I was like, there's no way. And but Jerry Mullen was the producer of it, and Jerry Mullen was the co-producer with Steven Spielberg of Schindler's List, one of my favorite movies. Jerry Mullen also did Jurassic Park, and he did Little Rascals, and he's like got this cool, I think he was a part of E.T. So there's all these like cultural iconic movies that we've been exposed to, and Jerry Mullen's producing this documentary. Yeah. So I'm like, well, it's got to be good. So I go to the documentary and I watch it, and I personally just had this spiritual moment, is how I would say it, like resonated just so deeply in my soul. And I was like, I will do anything to support this organization. Yeah. And so I did. I just became a volunteer. I mean, I swept the floors. I think I took the trash out better than anyone else has ever taken the trash out. Like
You just believed it.
I just believed it.
This private screening, was it in like a small theater? Or was it like in someone's house? I'm trying to remember where I came into this.
There was a couple small screenings that were happening around, and the one that I attended they went down to the Larry H. Miller Theater.
Okay. In like Sandy.
In Sandy.
I was totally there.
Yeah.
What's crazy about this, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's important to know, and why I feel so passionate about this, is at that point in my career, I was very much like an influencer. So I was being invited to all these things. Mm-hmm. And I got invited to this. And I felt the same way. I was like, how do maybe I can be a coach for the people that, the women that they rescue. Like, how can I get involved in this? And I promoted O.U.R for many, many years. And so another reason why I feel so called to not just have you on for you, but this story, that for also pausing and sharing. You've never shared your story with O.U.R ever, nowhere publicly, nor have I actually ever heard the wholeness of the story. But now that everything's coming out, I have such a responsibility to share some truth of what's actually happening, in the context that we are weaving throughout this whole experience, that it's super important to me. So I understand. I'm like, I mean, what is more heroic than saving children?
I think, well, one, particularly in the climate that we're in right now, I have a lot of media outlets that are reaching out, a lot of big YouTubers that are reaching out and saying, hey, Hugh, come on the show. Hey, put your story out here. We want your context to it. And the truth, I think two of them I've like texted back. Somehow they got my number. And my response has been, to the few that I've even responded to, is I'm only interested in the healing process. I think there's a tremendous amount of pain that has come from everything that's come out. I'm just at a chapter in my life, and I don't ever see me coming out of this chapter of judgment for punishment. I think that when things are so painful and there's an extreme amount of unfairness, we naturally want justice, and justice wants judgment, and judgment needs punishment. Somebody has to be punished. And I have this non-dualistic belief system, which I believe non-dualism and Christ consciousness are actually one and the same. Maybe there's some people that know more nuances about it than I do that could make some separation between the two, but non-dualism for sure is founded in non-judgment, and that was one of the core messages of Jesus. And I went through a chapter, I guess, many years to really starting to try to get clarity around what was the actual message of Jesus compared to what is the message that I think organized religion
is being profited on.
Yeah. And some of it's in alignment, some of it's accurate, and then some of it's not, in my opinion. And there's a fantastic documentary about that on Prime. I believe it's a part of the Great Courses of America. It's like $60 or $70, and it's called How Jesus Became God, or When Jesus Became God. And it's from one of the leading theologians at one of the top universities, and he wrote a book about it. So you could watch the book or you can watch the documentary, and it's like really well done. It's brilliant. And my point of bringing all that up is the greatest sermon that Jesus gave was on the Sermon on the Mount. That's generally what everyone agrees with. And I have read the Red Letter Bible, so that just extrapolates everyone else's voice out and only leaves Jesus's words in, and then you just read that. And that is worth reading. That you start seeing a lot of non-dualism, that if you're familiar with it, you can see it really easily. And one of the final messages, or one of the Sermon on the Mount, is Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And it ends in 7, and where 7 begins, 7 verse 1, it says, "Judge not, lest you be judged," right? And the judgments that you give to others will be the judgments that are met back to you. So like 6 years ago, I started reading the New Testament in the original Koine Greek, which is not classical Greek. It's like common layman's Greek is what it was written in, and they call it Koine Greek. And I spent like a couple $1,000 buying a whole bunch of Greek commentaries and concords and everything else that goes along with it. I don't speak Greek at all, so it was a very laborious process. And I would wake up every single morning at 5:30, and for an hour or two, I would just go verse by verse, and I would write it down. I would write the Greek down, the Greek like literal translation of it. Then I'd write the King James version of it. Then I would write Martin Luther's German version of it, because they say that's a really accurate translation from Greek to that classic German. I don't speak any of those languages, and I would just go like spend an hour or two, one verse at a time, because it just took that long. And I started finding these this hidden message, this brilliant message in the New Testament, in particularly the words of Jesus. So the point being is that when you get into the Sermon on the Mount and the scripture in chapter 7, verse 1, it says, judge not, lest ye be judged. And the word judgment is krinos, Krinos. And what krinos implies is that I know what is wrong. And when you get into non-dualism and you get into Sufism, with Rumi, you know, he says, hey, beyond that place of right and wrong is this, he calls it the field. There's this field, and that's where I'm going to meet you, right? And this is the place that I'm trying to have this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell the story of the contentment and the pain that I had in those chapters while standing in that field, which is actually an easy thing to do when you're in the field. It's not an easy thing to comprehend when you're not in the field. So those who are listening and don't understand what Rumi is saying and have never been beyond that place of right and wrong, it's, I think, my perspective of my experience and how I arrived at my accountable story is maybe incomprehensible. It might actually sound ridiculous
Until the person finds their own field.
And then they go,
and then they understand.
Oh, that's what's being said.
Because that's pure justice. Justice for yourself is finding the field.
Yeah, so if you take the word krynos and you say, let's take the term out and replace it with the definition, if that makes sense. So I'm going to pull the term judgment out of that verse and then put in the definition. Do not make a determination as to what is wrong. Otherwise, people will make a determination of your behaviors being wrong. That's essentially what Jesus is saying in this non-dualistic term. And so the only way to make that happen, the only way for that to be true, is that I have to see that the things that are torturing me are actually my teachers. And I think we all have those in our life. We have the torturers. And this could be because I'm trying to reach out to my mother and she doesn't want to have conversations. This could be because I haven't seen my children in years and I wait for the day that they are. This could be because I was in a relationship that I felt abandoned or abused or betrayed, and I wish that there was a way to actually have experienced belonging and nurturing and loyalty, but I didn't. And those are really, really painful things, and it's very easy for me to say, that was wrong. And the challenge of when I say what you did was wrong, when it comes from a place of painful unfairness, like extreme unfairness, then I want the world to be made right. And now I think I know what has been wrong, and therefore it implies that I now know what is right. So now I know how to go get the rightness back into the world.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that when I'm trying to make things right from the limited context and perspective that I have, I usually, especially when I'm in a place of pain, I usually go pick up the pitchforks, right, and the buckets of tar and feather. And it's like, I'm going to make this situation right by making you feel the pain that I feel.
Yes.
And hurt people. And so we're actually just promulgating the same problem
Over and over.
Over and over and over. And I think we have to break out of that pattern.
Yes.
So it's a long way to say, try to put that all into context.
A long way to say that you're in the field, meaning you've allowed yourself to intricately weave everything that has happened to you in your life to where you are now, to musting medicine, to bringing people to their wholeness. And we'll get back to how that all happened and why that all happened, but also honoring that everything had to happen exactly as it had and did to get you to this place of living your dharma and your purpose. And the reason why you're even here speaking with me versus anyone else, which I feel so honored, but also, having just a simple conversation of, this is my story. And instead of coming it from a victim place, which Let's be really honest. There are a lot of hurt people right now dealing with this situation with OUR.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in this feeling of justice. They're in this feeling of bitterness. And you, Hugh, have been through this journey with OUR and Tim where you've allowed yourself to honor and understand exactly what it's been to now take you to sitting here right now telling the story of, I wouldn't take any of it back. Here's the part of it. Here's the stories. And that is so important to you. Why? Tell me why that's so important to you to share the story in this way right now.
I think it's important for a multitude of reasons. One of them is that I'm getting a lot of messages from people that, it's on social media or it's text messages, and they're looking for clarity. And I essentially I'm not really talking to them very much about it. It's like, yeah, there's more context to the story. There's more to it than what you're thinking that there is. I think this is a way to be able to change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts.
Yeah. So the point of OUR and now here, and maybe it's not the softening of the people that we thought it was.
Right. Yeah.
It's the people that were involved. It's the people that got involved.
Yeah. I mean, going back to what you were saying is like you went to the screening. I mean, I was at the screening. I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing to think we were probably just like a few rows away from each other and had no idea. Somebody who's really, really, someone I've known for more than a decade and someone who is totally on Team Tim right now, called me up the other day, and we had a good conversation, and he asked me where my position was in it, and I said I don't think it's as bad as some of the people who have the pitchforks out are making it to be. And I also don't think it's as good as what we all hoped it to be. Mm. The whole movement, the whole guy behind the movement. And that's okay. I mean, here's the point. We have to be taught by this experience rather than tortured by it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Like, let's learn from it, because this actually becomes a metaphor for how the pain that we have in our homes, the pain that we have in our friendships, the pain that we have at business. Everything is relationship. And I've not always been great at relationships. In fact, arguably, I've been horrible at relationships, particularly some of the ones that were most important to me. Mm. And that's just because of core wounded beliefs that I have about myself. Mm-hmm. That I've carried around for decades, completely unknown to me. Being a people pleaser, not being authentic. Authenticity is the connection to self. And if I don't know myself, then how could I be authentic to myself?
Yeah.
I could only be authentic to what I'm feeling in the moment.
Authenticity is found through situations like this.
Absolutely.
Through saying, oh, actually, wait. Mm-hmm. I don't want this attachment. I don't want this bond. I don't even want this victimhood. Mm-hmm. Where do I find my authenticity? And in authenticity, you find your integrity. Mm-hmm. But it's created through all these experiences.
Yeah. And, the amount of betrayal and rejection and sadness and anger and rage that I felt when Tim and I went our separate ways came from how he handled it and the things that he did. I mean, they were just blatant lies that he was spreading. It's a little bit of a confusing story.
Yeah. Can we go back to your sweeping floors? So tell me, from the sweeping of the floors to breaking your separate ways, and you can take as much time as you need, because I think it can weave the story of.
So I go see the documentary, The Abolitionist. I walk away from The Abolitionist and I decide I was going through a really hard season of my life at that point. A couple years earlier, I had finalized a divorce, and that divorce had a custody battle that was, really, really high conflict. We had businesses involved, and it was just a really, I was very immature in how I saw the world and didn't know who I was. And it was a painful, painful chapter. And I was coming out of that. I'd been out of that for about 2 years. And I felt like, well, I had an uncle who actually sat me down. We were sitting on his front porch. And I think he saw the depression that I was in. He probably saw it more. I think everyone around me saw it, but I didn't. Because I was in survival mode. My world, I felt like, had been completely flipped upside down. And I think that's just common what happens in divorce. You go through that season. And to help me with it, my uncle says, I think you need to get outside of yourself. I think you're thinking about all of your problems, and you have legitimate problems, and that's okay. Who doesn't? And I think you need to just spend some time serving other people. So go find an organization that you could give yourself to kind of I don't know if it's a distraction play. Here's what's interesting, what happens in the body when we engage in service. People have to understand, if you want to make peace and you want to get to that field that we were talking about earlier, you have to start understanding your body. And your body is essentially a chemical soup, right? You've got your body, and then you have cortisol and adrenaline and dopamine and endorphins. And when we act in service, it activates dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. Dopamine feels good, and it rewards the body. Oxytocin is community bonding.
Yep. Love hormone.
The love hormone. And then your serotonin is your contentment. And so life starts feeling like it's fulfilled, or it's got some fulfillment to it.
And what better to feel better than helping save the children?
And so it feels like this all kind of
with
intersects.
This guy who has these crews, and it looks so beautiful.
Yes. And so I thought, okay, this is where I could like really sink my teeth into this and maybe get out of the season of my life. And so therefore I also don't care if I'm like taking out the trash or doing whatever. I have my full-time job that I was working at the time. And so any excess time I was a single dad who had children every other weekend. And so, you're going like 12 days at a time when you essentially haven't seen your children. That's just a thing that single dads have to, if you have that bare minimum custody. And, we couldn't figure out how to co-parent. And, I'm half to blame in that situation. It takes two. And so there's just a lot of nights, and I don't want to date. I don't want to go get into another relationship. So it frees up many, many nights that I'm going to be able to just go volunteer. And so I did. I was probably putting 30 hours of volunteer time a week just because I had so much extra time. And, the event that you and I went to was a private screening. And I don't remember the exact time, but it's in a couple of months is going to be the one night opening nationwide. The theory or the strategy for bringing awareness to this movement was they were going to rent out all of these theaters across the United States. I think there was like 400 theaters. They were going to play it, I think it was May 16th. They were going to play it this one night. And so they've got to build awareness around the nation to say, come sit in the movie theater and watch our movie. And they hadn't sold a ticket at the time. And they're a few months out, maybe 90 days or 4 months, if I remember right. And anyways, I'm volunteering. And, actually it might have been a whole year had gone by now that I think about the time frame. So I volunteered for a year, and now this one night event is coming.
Right.
And they're under the gun. And I was in I was in software. I understood marketing, understood social media. I just liked those things, and they needed a volunteer. And Operation Underground Railroad was working with the producers at the Abolitionist, two completely separate entities, and they're trying to work together, and they're not really working together. They just can't really find solutions because, well, you got guys that are running a business with Operation Underground Railroad, and then you got guys that are like fantastic filmmakers, but nobody really knows how to market and like sell movie theater tickets because that's not what they do. So I partnered up. I got asked, well, I kind of like forced myself into that just by being super annoying and just being like, let me help, let me help, let me help, let me help. And I think I can solve this problem. And, so I went to some of the guys over at Black Rifle Coffee who, you know, they had originally started here in Salt Lake City. And then one of my dear friends who ran a couple other organizations like Ready Man Media and some other products that he had. And he was very, very well connected. And I said, we've got 6 weeks to fill nationwide theaters. Let's do some videos, some short, cool videos. Let's get everyone to share it. So we created these share groups and we made these videos, and it was like, hey, buy a ticket. And we ended up generating, I think, just over $900,000 in ticket sales in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. I think I was one of those tickets. Well, and also it was probably your marketing tactics that I used to then share with my followers. Because it just, I mean, O.U.R was known everywhere, especially in the Utah influencer world.
Yeah, and that was one of the strategies that I had picked up from guys that were smarter than me. And I was like, that's brilliant. I understand how that works. Let's just apply that here. And so we started getting all the influencers. I mean, I was on I think I was on the first phone call with Lindsey Sterling. I was on the first phone call with Mike Tomlin at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, it was like the fun days when it was really starting to...
I have this huge mission, help us. And everyone's like, absolutely. Are you kidding? We're all against this. Let's do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the easiest thing to promote moving forward. And so it goes, that one night event goes better than they had expected.
And it was for fundraising, yes?
It wasn't for fundraising.
Okay.
But it did generate fundraising.
And the tickets were for fundraising? Like the tickets went towards it?
The tickets went towards the Abolitionist, which was an LLC. It's a for-profit entity to try to recoup the millions of dollars that had been put into making the documentary.
Okay, yes.
And so the ticket sales go to that. And they're hoping to sell enough tickets to recoup about $4.5 million.
For the creation of this
film.
For
the creation of this whole
Which
film.
ultimately the film was for promotion of this...
Of Operation Underground Railroad.
Okay.
And I wasn't in the meetings, but what's really interesting is in that film, The Abolitionist, the Operation Underground Railroad never shows up one time. On the back of the film... Operation Underground Railroad never shows up one time. So what ends up happening is it's trying to build awareness to human trafficking, to child sex trafficking, and not get pigeonholed into one organization. And the guys that were all behind that decided we'll have Tim be kind of the public face and the figure of this entire movement. And so the movie is really about the man, Tim, solving this human trafficking, which I personally have no issues with that. Like, it's great. Somebody's got to be the face of it. And at the time, he seemed like the perfect face for all of it. And
he was like the operations guy, and he had left his job at government so that he could work on this. And
yeah, it was a great story.
Yeah.
Right. It was presented really, really well. And I don't have any issues with that. I never saw any issues with it. Behind the scenes, working with Tim was always really challenging for the abolitionists. They ended up in a massive lawsuit, completely dissolved that whole opportunity, and I think it was largely ego was involved
From
in.
both sides?
I think ignorance from one side. I think ignorance on the side of the abolitionist, which does like
So the abolitionist came first and then OUR.
OUR was OUR had been stood up. Glenn Beck had been driving donations through his audience to it.
Okay.
And then that guy, Ryan Welch,
Mm-hmm.
who had sent me that email on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn, he had put a couple $1 million and said, let's make a documentary about this.
Okay.
And so that's where the funding came from, the Welch family. And they're a wonderful, wonderful family that had big, huge hearts. And so they said the awareness behind this, we hope that we'll recoup our money, but even if we don't,
Yeah.
what we think will happen is more children will get rescued, organizations will get really well funded, and I had heard reports that it had generated millions and millions of dollars in funding for Operation Underground Railroad. But it wasn't because they found Operation Underground Railroad. It's because they had found Tim, because he's in the documentary, and then his name becomes synonymous with Operation Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
And that was just whatever strategy that they all agreed on that, and that's just how it went. And the movement was all of a sudden like hockey stick, right? It just took off because of that. And because influencers like you and celebrities like Lindsey Sterling and dozens of others. I mean, Tony Robbins is involved with it, and for good reason. And we're going to rescue children. And it was really a beautiful time.
Yeah.
It was like years of just traveling around.
So your job was to market with OUR. And so once that worked and you were incredibly successful in that, then you worked side by side with Tim for a handful of years?
Yeah, almost 3 years. And what had happened is after that one night event, I got a text message. I actually ended up doing a Facebook Live with Tim in his driveway. I'm sure if somebody could go back and scroll through it, and I could be like, that's the one.
Yeah.
And so I drive over to his house. That whole year of volunteering, I had never even seen him in the office. He was always busy flying around, doing his thing. And so I didn't have any exposure to him other than like I would go to a gala and help set up chairs and he would speak at it. And, I was just at the gala and doing anything to support any of the team members and the actual employees there. And the one night event goes really, really well. And Tim reaches out and he calls the guy who was the president of OUR at the time. And he's like, hey, that event went really well. Who marketed that? And they were like, oh, it's this guy, Hugh. And he's been volunteering, like he's got his full-time job and he comes after hours and he just does anything that we ask him for. And we think he's like actually a pretty decent guy. Mm-hmm. And Tim calls one of the directors and says, yeah, he's easy to work with. He's a great guy. I mean, we don't have to pay him and he puts in a bunch of hours and will do anything that we ask. Like, who's not going to like a person like that? And me, I'm just trying to like climb out of the season of depression and
serve.
Yeah, and just serve. And so unexpectedly, I'm asked, hey, because that went really well, will you log into our social media accounts on Facebook and will you start doing more videos? So I said, yeah, and I'll just go interview him. So I'm in his driveway and we interview and we get, I think in like an hour, we got like 100,000 people watching it. And
showing us face more, becoming more of the face of OUR.
And you understand how that works and how important that is.
Yeah. It gives a persona, it gives a personality, a frequency and an energy to something that feels so big.
Yes.
We were able to see Tim, just a normal guy who's wanting to change the world.
Yes.
And we felt it.
Yes. And there is a Tim that right now is, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but there is a Tim that is genuine. Like I think that's
you could feel that.
Yeah. especially in those years. I haven't chatted with him in years, and I have no desire to chat with him now. I personally feel like trust has been abandoned and lost in there, and at this point, it wouldn't matter to me what he said. I wouldn't trust it. But in those years, I did trust it, and there was an authenticity. And despite how I feel today, I still believe that authenticity is there, that he really does want to make a positive impact, and he really does want to rescue children. I think that's authentic to his truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a very unpopular opinion right now.
Yeah.
Because he has some other things that make it really hard to believe in his behaviors.
It's gotten really muddy.
And it's gotten very muddy.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a context to that nobody understands, maybe not even him.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing in his life that's saying he's actually going to be as big as this is, and it takes off with very, very little effort. Not to diminish the hard work that goes into running a movement like that, and to the directors and to the employees that are dealing with the day-to-day of a thing that you can do to ruin your business is grow too fast.
Yeah.
And they're trying to hold on to the rocket ship that's taking off.
Right.
And how do you spend the money, and how do you do that? And we don't have processes in place and I think they weathered that like really well.
Yeah.
It would take very unique individuals who had tremendous business experiences to maybe do a better job.
Yeah.
And so I find that there's a lot of grace in the context of what they were dealing with and how successful it was happening.
And going back to him, to the context at the very beginning of our conversation, of the opening of the hearts and softening of the hearts, opening and softening of the hearts of the people, do you believe that that was Tim's intention initially, or was it the child trafficking saving that, or was it that, like, was that all synonymous together?
That came from the president of the Mormon Quorum of the Apostles, President Ballard.
That concept.
That concept came from him.
So Tim was doing this. They get connected, and
they got connected over the book he wrote.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know that part.
Interesting.
They have a connection prior to Tim ever starting Operation Underground Railroad because of the book.
Okay.
So the book is like doing its own thing.
Yeah.
But then Glenn starts talking on the radio one day, and Tim's already got a connection because of his book, and he's already been on his show because of his book. And he's like, hey, my day job, I'm working for the government, and I actually think that there's an opportunity for in the private sector.
It all connects of this is one of the ways that we can open the hearts and soften the people.
And so if anyone's like really interested in the context of how does this all come, there's a lot of chatter about it. And to be honest, I haven't stayed up on it. I feel like I already know the story. So it's like, whatever. But, you got to read the book to understand.
Well, it's so easy now that now it's popular, and people are like, they want to point the fingers at the church, at this LDS church, or at him, or at the funding, or whatever it is. But when we look at it from this is another piece of why it's so important and powerful that you're sharing your story now from a place of the field of accountability, because everyone has that, including Tim and including O.U.R. and all that. I want to believe, and I think that it's okay to believe that it's based off of pure intentions.
Yeah. And I think it was.
Yeah.
My honest opinion, it's very unpopular opinion right now, but my truth behind that is I think it was started in a really pure place.
No one knows that better than I think than you do.
Yeah. And so,
so you're growing.
Yeah. And the hard part about the accountable story, to your point, here's how I define accountability, and this is a new definition for me. I think I adopted it about a year ago. I had some just some brilliant friends that helped me understand this. Accountability is the ability to account for what happened without finding fault in anyone involved. It's an accounting. It's an Excel spreadsheet.
It's the data.
It's just the data.
Yep.
Just look at the stats.
Yep.
And so Brene Brown says blame has an inverse relationship with accountability. So in other words, we can say the opposite of accountability is blaming. So accountability has to include not blaming, because the two don't go together. And I think for many decades I had a definition. My working definition for most of my life was that accountability was to figure out who was at fault.
Interesting.
And which
ultimately puts someone as victim.
But now you put somebody at victim.
Yeah.
And so then you get out of the field.
Yes.
And so I used Brene Brown's research and data to realize that accountability had to include no one being at fault, because that's what blaming is. I'm finger pointing and I'm figuring out who's wrong. And so accountability, therefore, is, and this is my definition of it, the world according to Hugh, is me accounting for my role in the rupture of our relationship. Now, business is relationship, friendships are relationships, partnerships and spouses, marriages are relationships, and we have rupture. And I don't think you can have a relationship without rupture.
Yep.
It's impossible. And so accountability, here's what makes accountability hard, because accountability is, this is my role in the rupture of our relationship. Well, to be accountable, you first have to be authentic, which Gabor Mate, the guy known as the People Whisperer, has fantastic books out there. Just got interviewed on Joe Rogan like a year ago. I highly recommend everyone dive into and just embody everything that he's talking about. Gabor says authenticity is the connection to self. And so if you think about, how do I connect to myself if I don't know myself, right? We'd mentioned that a little bit earlier. So I need to be authentic to truly take accountability for my role in the rupture of our relationship. But if I don't really know myself, then I'm not really going to be able to know how to account for my role in it. The other thing that it takes is vulnerability. And the Greek word for vulnerability is a willingness to be wounded. So I'm going to come to you and I'm going to account for my role in the rupture of our relationship. And now I have to be vulnerable, to be wounded, a willingness to be wounded, because I might have done some dumb shit, right? I might have really made some mistakes. And so where's my safety in accountability? And I believe that the only way to be safe is that the relationship has to matter to both parties enough to make a promise that the vulnerabilities will not be weaponized.
Which, how often does that happen? And that
only in conscious relationships.
Only in conscious relationships, and also only in the willingness of the other to see the other, which in a lot of these situations, which is what I will talk more about, this relationship with you and Tim. You know, it's one thing to say, I'm going to look at this experience and see where I have, and in that experience, I can find a lot about myself. I can literally find my authenticity. I can find who I am, and also then continue to ripple that out into other experiences in my life. But if someone isn't willing to do that, dare I say that that's where, the light, like you say, and I have no really attachment to Tim. I don't know him personally. I do believe that his intention was pure initially, of course, but the lack of anyone being willing to look at accountability takes you in the trajectory on this path of losing that in not just one relationship, but in all
of them,
including business, which is,
and here's some context to that. Again, from my point of view, what Tim never had was a community, and I'm talking maybe just an inner circle, a couple of people who he could be fully vulnerable with. He would never be fully vulnerable with, and who could then hold him accountable. And so what does your ego do when, because look, there was a whole term, it was called the Tim Graveyard. And I heard him refer to it. And that was all of these people that had done business with him. I'm not the only one. Like there's dozens of people that are in the quote unquote Tim Graveyard. And where it happens is where you get into the graveyard is when you say, I don't know if I agree with your thought. I don't know if and you push back against something.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like out.
Yeah.
And so he may argue with that. I care less. I fully stand in my truth in that. Like, he does not keep people around.
And that's when the spiral
Yep.
just continued.
Yep. And so if you think about it, and this is some of the context that I think provides grace to him and to any of us who have experienced this, is that what you end up with is yes men around you.
Right.
You end up with just the sycophants who only tell you what you want to hear because, they want to participate in the project. They want to get paid and have a good life because it is a good life.
They want to believe in it with their blinders on. They want to see it so bad. Rose-colored glasses. Yeah.
Yeah. So you just get a bunch of sycophants who are extremely talented, very intelligent, but will never push back against any of your ideas. And then you happen to be... think about a couple things that are simultaneously happening. Your partner, you have an organization that is rescuing children, and you become essentially the most popular face in that entire industry with one of the most popular organizations that's growing in that industry. And you now have multiple documentaries that are being made of you. You're interacting with celebrities. And prior to any of this, your experience is you were a government worker.
Yeah.
Like, you were never supposed to have any of this happen. And I know that if it would have been me, my ego would have shot through the roof.
And your mind's a powerful thing. And if you believe that it's all for good, truly... And you can see that. I don't follow him. I haven't been following this very closely, just little bits here and there, but you can see he's still showing up, and he believes.
100%.
He believes.
He actually has a superpower to fully believe whatever he thinks.
Yeah.
And
would you argue that almost everybody, the mind...
We believe what we want to believe.
Absolutely. Our own truths.
Yeah.
And also, I have my own thoughts and opinions on this idea of narcissism. But even that, being able to not see, to not question, to gaslight everybody into believing, well, which is arguably why he was able to convince these people, particularly the women that were working as, his wives in this experience, to believe that this was how they were supposed to do it, to rescue children through the guise of this, which we'll get to in a little bit. We kind of jumped through there, but it can happen to anybody.
Yeah, that's the grace that I put out there.
That's the grace.
Is that
and it's slow.
He's not unique. There's nothing that makes him this incredible villain. I also think there's nothing that makes him this incredible rescuing hero. I just don't believe in that. I think in the field, the villain and the hero don't exist. I think you kind of just become one in all of it, and therefore you just graduate from it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people I think a lot of people are looking for someone to come out and rescue them. And I think the thing that we really love about this caricature of somebody coming and being our rescuer is that then we're going to be delivered.
Yeah.
And it's like, nah, you can learn from the lessons yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I got a tremendous amount of appreciation for the pain that I experienced I see that everything that happened in the rupture of our relationship happened for my growth and happened for me. It's taken years. I think I'm still growing and learning from it, but it is something that I have tremendous appreciation over. And I use the word appreciation because I'm thinking of like real estate. It's like this little thing that had a little bit of value, but as time has gone on,
It's appreciated.
it's appreciating more and more and
Absolutely.
more. And that's because I've pulled out of the victim mentality. And my victim mentality that I had in the very beginning is really simple, and I have a lot of evidence to justify being a victim if we're interested in that, which I no longer became interested in. But I had all of my evidence, and the victim story means I don't have to have a role in the rupture of our relationship.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And when you look at the data in the social sciences and the behavior sciences and in the data of child trauma, the only people that cannot influence their own environment are children. So children can be victims.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, when you can make adult decisions, and then you're no longer a victim because you were a co-creator in everything that had happened. And that was one of the most difficult things that I had realized, was that I was in a situation, as painful as it was, and as much betrayal and anger and violation of the agreement of our friendship and of our business relationship that I felt was crossed and damaged. I still had a role to play in how I was showing up. And
it's the grace that we have. It's such an important key, not just grace to, I mean, of course, there's a point when you get into the grace of the accountability, or the grace to Tim, for example, or the person, whoever it is that's in the story. But as we, and ultimately this is just another story of us coming home to ourselves, just with the focus of, you and Tim and O.U.R. But we as children, we are so susceptible to conditioned. That's where we learn. From ages 0 to 7 is when we are literally malleable. We don't have a prefrontal cortex. We learn everything. So then things happen in our life, and all we ever know is to be a victim, because that's all we were as children, in a way. And then things shift, and you continue, in some cases, to get knocked on your ass over and over until you realize, oh, wait, I have a choice. And then everything starts to open up, and that's when the healing really starts to continue. Of course, that looks different with everyone.
yeah, the pattern repeats until I repair the ruptured relationship with myself.
And do you believe that rupture between you and Tim is where you found your ruptured relationship with yourself?
100%. Yeah. And when I saw it from there, I saw it in my divorce.
Yeah.
I saw it in
the ripples.
It was like, oh, this is
right.
This is anywhere I've felt betrayed, anywhere I felt abandoned. Those relationships, I think, were soul contracts that were trying to help me find me. I had a client, because I do one-on-one coaching, and I had a client just a couple of weeks ago, and he called me up, and they had a rupture in his partnership, with his, they're not married, but they've been together for a while. And he said, he was almost in tears, and he said, I said, what is it that your soul really is yearning for? And he said, I just want to be with a partner who shows up as much as I show up. I really feel like I am just doing all this extra work and she's not. And I said, okay, so what is that? Like, clearly it's torturing you. You have a tremendous amount of pain for this. And so what is this teaching you? And, he's like, I don't know. That's why I call you, and I'm sending you money to help me through this. And he said, this is my perspective. You might actually do more work, and you might actually show up in better, more conscious ways than what she does. but it's probably barely, because we attract the same level as what we are. It might show up a little bit differently here and there, but I said, what she's teaching you is not how poorly she shows up for you, but how poorly you show up for you. Because you have this relationship with you, and she's mirroring that back to you.
Yes.
She's allowed to make mistakes. She's allowed to forget to do the dishes or whatever. But our partners are not showing up. I'm not showing up better for her than she's showing up for me.
You're showing up less for yourself.
I'm showing up less for myself, because what she's showing me is how little I show up for myself. And this is one of those concepts that's only grasped in the field.
Yeah. The mirrors, the reflections, the inward understanding of why everything has been perfectly laid out for us to get us to that space.
Yeah. So I began to see that through the pain of the rupture of the relationship that existed between Tim and I. And so can you go into a little bit, and whatever you're comfortable with? You were there with him for 3 years, one-on-one with him. And then was it that he continued to have more yes men around him, and that's what shifted? Was it, a couple different experiences where you just like, oh, this is going in a direction I didn't feel comfortable with? And then what happened? I think part of my accountable story to that is I have to be honest that I think I largely was a yes man.
You wanted to believe in him so bad.
I wanted to believe in it so bad. And I believe that I was that because I didn't have enough education about the industry, about what was going on. And I also was really only there to like do social media and take notes in big important meetings so that we could know how to like tell the story of that. But one day he called me up and he said, I had started reading his books. This is really early on in our relationship. And he called me up and he said, we got along really, really well. Try to put some context to why this phone call came. We actually got along really well. He's a very charismatic guy. Like, it was fun to be with him. And it was fun when it was fun, but when it wasn't, it wasn't. And if that makes sense. And he calls me up and he says, I've been working with the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles for the LDS Church for a long time. He's read my book, the one I'm reading at the time. And I'm like, okay. And he said, he's like a grandfather to me. Now, this is 2016. And he says, it's like a grandfather to me. And I said, are you guys even related? Because they have the same last name. Yeah. And he's like, weirdly enough, we're not. Like, no, we're not related. And he said that President Ballard, that's how he always referred to him, was very interested in figuring out how to actually solve the problem of child sex trafficking, which who's not, right? And he said, I have a meeting with him, and I've been meeting with him for a couple of years prior already, and I'd like you to come to this meeting. Now, at this point, I'm just reading the book. I'm trying to get caught up on what he really wants his vision for how Tim is going to rescue the children. And I'm also doing a lot of social media, a lot of Facebook Lives. I'm following him around. We're doing lives, like, I think on a weekly basis.
And you know who President Ballard is.
And I know who President Ballard is. And I knew that he was also meeting with some higher ups in other organizations, other religions, businesses. I think everyone was trying to solve this problem. And he says, I've got a meeting coming up, but this is a meeting that's consistently happening. And the reason that this meeting between him and President Ballard is happening is because they're trying to figure out how this book, the contents of this book, ties to this personal desire that President Ballard has in his own personal life. And I said, okay, sounds good. So we go to the meeting, and I find out what that personal desire is in President Ballard's life. And he says, I've been waking up, I've been having dreams, and my heart is so sad. And these dreams are very, very heartbreaking. And he says, I see so much pain in the people in my dreams. And I wake up and I think, how do we heal the pain? And I'm like, that's like endearing, right? He's got this old guy's in his, I think at the time he was like in his late 80s. And he was very genuine to this, like misty, teary eyes. And he gave us some context, very generalized context, nothing in specific details, but that they were receiving a lot of phone calls at their church about different abuse cases and child molestation and stuff that's just happening in our culture and in our world more than any of us, more than it should happen, right? And what we realize. And so he's having dreams about this. And he says that his personal downloads, this is what I'll call them. He didn't refer to them as downloads, but his personal answers to his prayers is that we have to figure out how to change the hearts and the minds of the people. That's what he said. And so I'm in this meeting with him and Tim and myself, and it's like, how do we do that? So I asked the question, I said, so how do you change the heart? Like, tell me more. Like, how do you change the hearts and the minds of the people? And President Ballard sat for just a minute or two, and he's like, Tim and I have talked a lot about this. And he said, I think you change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. And so then I said, well, how do you soften the heart? This is like a long conversation, and I'm shortening it down. And I said, well, how do you soften the hearts of the people? And he kind of sat there for a second, and he's like, that's what we got to figure out. And that was what he wanted to do. And he said, I believe that if we can figure out how to change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts, no child will have to be rescued. Because when we're living in a culture, in an environment like that, the children aren't trafficked. And so I felt like that was a really great articulation of a big vision of like, okay, it's very broad stroke, but
and at this point,
let's go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. At this point, O.U.R. was rescuing children. They were they were doing jumps and all those things.
Yeah. This is probably when you're like trying to figure out, how do I help?
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to figure out. Lindsay Sterling's trying to figure out how she can play the violin and tutu around the stage for
money
operation. Yeah. Everyone's trying to figure this out.
So did something shift in him after that? Or was it slowly shifting?
So here's what's interesting, and here's some context that I think is worth providing. From the Mormon narrative, how would you describe an apostle? If you're a Mormon.
Yes.
And who is an apostle? And then who's the president of the quorum of the 12 apostles?
It's the prophets.
Yeah.
Seers, revelators,
and
leaders of the church.
And then what do they do for their people?
Yeah, they gain inspiration. They clearly clear the path for everything. They guide, they teach, they lead.
They communicate with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they communicate any kind of revelation, any kind of nowadays. What is that revelation? They get.
So at the time, Tim is he believes all of that you just said.
That he is.
That President Ballard.
Oh, is an apostle. Okay. Yes.
Yes, is an apostle who's communicating with Jesus. And now you've got senior leadership in the apostle who's calling you up. This is this is like near the Pope calling up a Catholic, right? A fundamental believing Catholic. And the Pope calls you up and says, I can't figure this problem out, but I think you can figure this problem out. Like, what does your ego do if
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
that person?
Da, da, da. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm putting on my cape.
Yeah.
I'm dedicating my entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think anybody would do that.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out what your organization is. You might not do that if the Mormon church calls
Right.
you up and says that.
Right.
And you might not do that if the Pope calls you up and says that. But gosh, if you believe in Donald Trump and he calls you up and says that, then
Anybody on a higher pedestal, anybody for the greater good, anyone connecting to God
Yes.
in source.
yes.
Yes.
And so this, I think, is starting to steamroll where we find Tim today. Is he's got somebody that he holds so high on a pedestal and who's saying, I think you're the guy to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, like, you're naive, and if you don't understand what the ego is going to do with information like
Yeah.
that, when your hero tells you you are the hero.
Yes.
Now, I don't think that, I think some context to President Ballard, I don't think that was his intention at all.
Right.
I think he was just genuinely thinking, like, how do we solve this problem?
Yeah. Especially from the guise of, any kind of religion, there is this concept of a little inflamed ego of, we have the truth. It is, this is in any religion.
Mm-hmm.
But just like any of the leaders, I do believe that there's a good intention of, well, we want peace.
Mm-hmm.
We want everyone to soften their hearts, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're told eye to eye, I'd want to know that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to learn that.
And from their perspective, again, this had been something they had been working on for a long time, but had never landed on how do you actually do this? And from their perspective, the best thing that they had at the time, and admittedly, it was like, is this the best thing we have at the time?
Mm.
So everything was willing to be edited. At least that's how it felt to me. Because it was like, let's just solve this problem.
Okay.
We didn't care how we get there. Let's just solve it. And I do feel like that was very genuine and very authentic. I do. And I got subpoenaed a couple years ago by the FBI and the Davis County DA's office. And I was in there, I think, like right around 3 hours. And I was grilled on all the details and the text messages and everything. And that subpoena still remains classified and hasn't been released. But the same things I'm telling you is the same things I told them. I'm like, I never found that there was no manipulation for power. It just not in the meetings that I was in.
Yeah.
I saw genuine, authentic, let's solve the problem and change culture and soften the hearts and the minds of the people. There could have been other meetings. I highly doubt that there were. And in fact, I would dare say there wasn't. But what there definitely was is a deep belief in the book that Tim had written. And that essentially was, I got very, very little, instruction on how to, I was tasked with basically write the business plan for how we can change the hearts and the minds of the people. And simultaneously, I'm also going to go out and do the social media for Operation Underground Railroad and for Tim's personal brand, because somebody's got to understand this common thread that's running through of how we're actually going to rescue all of the children so they don't even have to get rescued. We're going to change culture. We're not going to rescue children. We're going to change culture. And that is in result going to rescue all the kids. And then literally it was like, read the book, The Covenant, and then write the business plan. And can we meet in like 3 weeks? And I'm like, well, I've mostly got the book written. I can't say that I mostly have comprehension of the book. I wish ChatGPT existed back then.
You mean you had the book read? You read the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had the book read, and I was still trying to wrap my mind around, how does this change the hearts and the minds of the people?
And also, how does that connect? I mean, I know that that's how we all got here. That's how it all happened. But like,
Right.
How does this save children?
Yeah. And my
And
belief is,
meanwhile, all the money is still being funneled, and all these people are
yeah.
believing that there's real change.
And so at this time you have an organization. Now, if you just put on the lens of the organization, Operation Underground Railroad, they're receiving all of this money. It's gone way more popular than they ever expected it to go. It's what we all would hope for our business, but rarely ever happens. And it's happening for them. And none of them have ridden an opportunity like this before. None of them, I think, have really managed anything like this before. Yeah. And you also have a bunch of family members of Tim, friends of Tim, and former like business people. Like, you know, you're going to do what you're going to do is you're going to hire the people that you know. And it was just happening really quickly. It was just all happening really quickly. And I think they were trying to figure out their internal processes. I mean, there's millions of dollars that are pulling in. And there's a picture that I have. I mean, it's on my Instagram somewhere. Tim's doing an interview with Tommy Loren, who at the time I think was on Fox News. And they decided that she was going to tell the story. She's the blonde haired. She used to do a really popular news bit. I can't remember what it was, but she was really popular at the time. It still is. And she's like, "Hey, I want to interview Tim." So we pull up this laptop on this crappy couch, on this crappy little coffee table. I think it was like plastic from IKEA. And we have a little lamp. And somebody took a picture of me because I pull it up on my phone or on my laptop, and you can't see Tim's face, but he's on this live interview. And so I throw my phone down and I run over and I grab the lamp and I stretch it out as far as the cord will reach. And somebody snapped a picture of it because I guess somebody thought it was funny. But it's me holding a lamp with a lampshade on it, trying to get enough light. I mean, it was just like, it was hodgepodge back then. And we were just trying to piece things together as quick as we can. And it was fun. But again, I think there's a lot of grace for those. And I think it's hard to give grace unless you've been in something like that.
Yeah.
And
it just happens so fast.
It just happens so fast.
And then you have somebody who you believe, you can look up to more than anybody else, telling you essentially, or at least you interpreted it as you are chosen. Mm-hmm. You are a chosen person.
Yeah, and I had done the same thing, I think, that Tim was doing to President Ballard, I had done to Tim. I put him up on a pedestal. And then he was saying, "Hugh, you got to be the one to write the business plan."
Right.
So it's just kind of trickling downhill, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to...
Yeah.
I'm
chosen too.
I do have an amazing purpose. And I think that's true. I do think I have an amazing purpose. I think it's true for everyone, not me.
Yes.
It's all of us.
Yes.
And one of the great lessons, not to skip ahead, but one of the great lessons that I learned from this was, I mean, I was really tore up over it. And about 8-9 months had passed since the dissolving of our relationship. And I decided that I was going to fast for a couple of days, like just stop eating, right? It's a modality that I use to try to get clarity, clean up my body, and eat right. So I started eating right for a few days and then fasted for a few days. And the intent or the motive of my fast was, what should I have learned? What's a critical lesson that I should have learned from that? Because I was kind of over being upset about it. So I was like, now I need to go find a lesson
it's like
out of it.
Stages of grief. You're like, okay, I'm ready. Yeah.
And the lesson that came so clearly is that for me, the projects had become more important than the people involved. And I learned a really great lesson is that we never accomplish the projects that we want to when we prioritize the projects over the people.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful lesson to learn in that experience. And a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your accountability story.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of it. Yeah.
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 So tell
I
me
think,
how you got
another
there.
part was that, I had put him up on a pedestal. And when I put him up on a pedestal, or anyone on a pedestal, I have to put myself down.
Yeah.
If I've got to put you up, then I have to put myself down. And if I put myself down, it's really hard for me to be authentic, because now I'm at risk of not belonging,
Yeah.
getting rejected.
Yeah.
But if we're all on equal grounds. Now, also my accountable story is that I don't think I wanted to put myself
You weren't aware.
equal to him, because I think I wanted a rescuer. I wanted the world to have a rescuer. And I also, I don't think I valued my gifts. I don't think I valued me
Mm-hmm.
to be equal to
Mm-hmm.
something
Mm-hmm.
like that. But yet here I am in the meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like, what's wrong with my self-esteem? What's wrong with my
Mm-hmm.
self-worth? What's wrong with, you know, I couldn't see me
Mm-hmm.
and where I actually was. It just all felt like a dream had
Yeah.
come true, and it was
Yeah.
more Disney and Pixar and magical fairies
Right.
than it was, just get the work done.
Well, and when you do that, even if it's unconscious from childhood trauma or whatever it is, I'll say this again and again, accountability and integrity go hand in hand. Because if you allow yourself to go below someone, intentionally or not,
Mm-hmm.
the lack of integrity is there.
Mm-hmm.
This is why self-love is so important, and why, I don't care how cringy it sounds, coming back to your wholeness, that is the key.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what brings it together to where we are all chosen.
Mm-hmm.
We are all prophetic in understanding our connection to God.
Yeah. So another great key lesson that I learned out of this actually comes again from the Sermon on the Mount. And it's in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. It's in chapter 5, verse 48. In the King James Version, it says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." I think it's a horrible translation. And the only reason I think it's a horrible translation is not because the translators didn't get it right the first time. It's because that translation was done almost in the 1600s, and language drifts. And the term perfect doesn't mean whole in our culture, at least not in the culture that I'm exposed to.
Right.
For me, when I was reading that, what I heard was, "Be flawless, Hugh, even as your Father in heaven is flawless." And I'm like, well, that feels like I'm set up for failure. In Greek, a decent translation for it, the word is teleos. So where we get the word perfect comes from the Greek word teleos. And what it means is complete, whole, lacking no parts. And so a direct translation could be, own your wholeness, knowing that you are complete, lacking no parts, even as your Father in heaven is complete, lacking no parts, and knows his wholeness.
Yeah.
And now we're just trying to own our wholeness.
Yeah.
And now we get to embody the human experience with our flaws,
Right.
and realize simultaneously, and this is one of those rules or those principles that exist only in the field. Can you understand this? And do you begin to see this? Is that two things that are diametrically opposed are simultaneously true. And what I mean by that is that I get to have my flaws and I'm whole all at the same time. And to have flaws and to be whole, or to have flaws and be perfect, if you want to use that word, those two things seem diametrically opposed from each other, but they're simultaneously true. Higher consciousness, or what they call Christ consciousness, only exists. Those things can only be understood when you're beyond that place of right and wrong, out in the field.
Yeah. Well, and this is why this is so important to talk about the intentions of, since Tim is the topic, of Tim. and knowing that two things can be true at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And that's exactly right.
So,
like, he's as great.
yes.
He's as great as he's as great as I ever knew somebody to be. I mean, he married my second wife and I. I mean, like, this is how close we were.
Mm-hmm.
And he was as terrible as I've ever known anybody to be.
Yeah.
I mean, he's both.
And we're seeing that.
Mm-hmm. And I don't have any judgment of that. I don't determine that to be wrong. And this is what I believe. Until you have read the works of Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, Brene Brown, you shouldn't weigh in on anybody's journey that they have. Yeah. And I say those because those are the leading minds at the cutting edge of understanding emotional wounds and traumas as they pertain to our relationships. And so we have relationships, and relationships have repair, or they have rupture, and we wouldn't have had the relationship if we didn't like it and didn't want it. So if my relationship
didn't attract it,
and then my relationship that I've attracted now has a rupture, and the rupture only needs one thing, and that's a repair. And I don't think that we understand the repair process. But when you study those experts, the repair process starts to come out. And you know what they say is that when we start to understand trauma and all of our attachments and all of our core wounded beliefs about ourselves, what we then begin to see is that there's no actual labeling of mental illness. So we talked about narcissism earlier, and it's like, the
label of it. We love to.
That's
why I said
label.
It's really. I don't even love to use that word because it's people love to victimize themselves under the guise of their narcissist.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and when, here's the story of Narcissus. This is the Greek guy that we get the word narcissism from. He's a young boy who his parents get a divorce, and he is a beautiful man. He's Narcissus. I can't think of how you actually pronounce his name, but he's a guy. We'll call him Narcy.
Got it. Love it.
Narcy goes out to the pond, and he sees himself in the reflection of the water, and he can't stop staring at it. And he won't leave the lakeside. He won't leave the shore. And he just stays there all the time. And the people in the community are like, hey, send the beautiful women out there and like see if they'll go on dates with him. And he won't leave this rock that he's sitting on, and he keeps looking into the reflection of the mirror, the reflection of the water. And he's a beautiful man, and he gets consumed with his own beauty. Well, here's the rest of the story. His parents got a divorce. His father, and this is what they think, right? There's some stories that say this. His father ends up in a relationship with another man, and they believe that man that entered his life may have molested Narcy. And so Narcy's got this deep wound inside of himself because you can only have 4 types. This is generally what the data says. There are 4 types of wounds that will wound the soul and remove and make you think that you are not whole. The first is abandonment. The second is abuse. The third is betrayal. And the fourth is rejection. And so here's what happens. If I was abused, that makes me abusable. And if I'm abusable and I was abused, then I'm worth abusing. If I was abandoned, then that makes me abandonable. And if I'm abandonable and I was abandoned, then I must be worth abandoning. And when this happens as a little child to us, because these things happen as our, you mentioned our prefrontal cortex, and our prefrontal cortex for men doesn't even fully develop until like late 20s, early 30s. Women's a
Little earlier.
little earlier,
Yeah.
obvious to see, but and reading those experts, you start to understand the science of what's happening in the prefrontal cortex. This is how I tell the story. And so this is unconsciousness becoming consciousness, is that I have to have my prefrontal cortex to be able to write the story. And the story is that it happened to me and I'm a victim. And then what happened with me is that I decided that I wanted to learn from it instead of be tortured by it. And so I had to get curious, because my friend Jeff Kirkham says that curiosity is what converts the torturer into, or transforms the torturer into the teacher. Curiosity is what transforms the torturer into the teacher.
It's always questioning.
Yes. And so if I take on at this young age an experience that I perceive happened to me, then I develop a core wounded belief about me. And now I need my whole world to prove this core subconscious belief to be true, because beliefs really only want one thing: be true.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to set up all my relationships, unbeknownst to me,
They want proof.
to then play this out. And so if I believe that I have two core wounded beliefs. One is that love leaves, and the second is that I'm worth leaving. Until I started to step into the field and started to, Carl Jung said that we must bring the subconscious to the conscious. Otherwise life will happen and we will just call it fate. And so when life feels like it's just happening and I'm a victim to it, what you have is subconscious beliefs running the patterns of your daily life, and you're not aware of the beliefs that you have about yourself.
And they just keep manifesting
and
over and over and over.
Exactly as you said. And so these patterns began to cease happening in my life because I went through it and said, I want to understand why is this happening and what was my role in this situation, which is extremely scary. Like I think that we all want to understand. At least for me, I want to understand, why are the patterns that are not serving my life, not giving me the results that I want, why do they keep repeating? And the fear that I have is not to go look at that, but that if I do look, I'll find that it's absolutely true and that there's no hope. And
without hope, what do we have?
Only despair.
I also think that there's a lot to do with comfort, the comfort in trauma bonding, the comfort in knowing that this is me. This is just who I am. This is the plate that I've been served. And if I look at that, then I don't have to actually step up to whether it's my potential or my role in all of it as well. So did we wrap up Nessie? Where's Nessie? Let's finish that before we wrap up.
Well, what you have is you have this young man who has deep emotional wounds that believes he is he believes that he is abusable. And if I believe that I'm abusable, well, I don't want to go hang out. I don't want to go on dates. Because it hurts.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to remove myself from actually having healthy, conscious relationships. And the story goes that he ends up just falling in love with himself.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have it. The question is, why didn't he have a community? Where's the community at? Well, Carl Jung said that you didn't get wounded alone and you won't heal alone.
Yeah.
And so I got wounded in my culture and in my community, and I will be healed in a culture and a community. It's probably not going to be the same community, right? You get to upgrade and get a better community. And so why he doesn't have a community is because I think a community is established of three pillars. The first pillar is authenticity, the connection to self. The second is the vulnerability, which means to be a willingness to be wounded in that relationship and in my relationships. And I'm not going to have a relationship that I cannot trust.
Yeah.
And trust in a safe relationship is that my vulnerabilities will not be weaponized. And if my vulnerabilities will not be weaponized, then it's safe enough to be accountable and account for my role in the rupture.
Right.
There are relationships that I have still to this day that have ruptured that I have not been accountable to. It's not because it's not because I don't understand what my role is. It's because I feel that if I go and account for my role, it will be weaponized, because I'm going to go and tell you, these were my vulnerabilities and here's what I was dealing with. Here's where I was inauthentic. Here's where I was struggling. Here's where, I was just out of integrity. Here's where I was playing a victim, and here's where I was playing small. Well, I'm not going to tell you that if you're going to weaponize
If it's
that.
not, yes. Yes. And the third, authenticity,
Accountability.
accountability. And going back to Tim, when you're not even able to see that within yourself, really it goes back to what you discussed or what you talked about, how when it's going so fast, how is there even time to breathe?
There's not.
One thing that I'm so grateful for with the pandemic was that it forced us all to breathe. It forced us all to be like, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into? Whether that was seen or not, or whether just, people decided to just continue to go through with that. And that can be really terrifying. And I think that, to wrap up the narcissism situation, which is such a beautiful way to weave that story, we all have, in a way, that to protect ourselves. Narcissism is just the way to protect ourselves.
Absolutely.
And who wants to be betrayed by yet another community? Who wants to be betrayed again and again? And so to find safety in ourselves, in the deepest parts of our knowing, trusting that they're real. And another piece to this is just remembering that our truth is always shifting, always moving, always question. The term enlightenment is literally defined as always questioning. But when you have millions and millions of people's dollars and you're
put
on
up
this
on a
pedestal, yes, and you're supposed to know the way to soften the hearts and to save all the children.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Yeah, what a beautiful thing to be tasked with that by such an influential person. I don't think the Mormon Church was tasking him with that. I don't think the Mormon Church I don't even think they knew what was going on and what meetings were happening. Not because it was hidden or anything like that. It's just, there's a lot happening. But what a beautiful thing to be tasked with trying to solve such a problem. What a terrifying, destructible thing to think you're the only one that's going to figure it out and that you're the only one that's got the plan and that you don't have it.
Yeah.
Like he knows he doesn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine the pressure and.
Oh, I saw the pressure in him.
Yeah. And that's what shifted.
Yeah, I think it has to shift, and at the same time, anybody that is trying to hold you accountable to something bigger than you, you get rid of them. It becomes a very lonely, lonely place, and so then now you literally have set yourself up to be the only one, and
is that what happened?
Yeah.
You tried to help him find some accountability.
Yeah. I don't think I was mature enough to be able to be the one to do that. I think that's why the relationship ended, and I'm not the one doing that anymore. Yeah, those projects like that where you're trying to change culture require a community of people that are under a Magna Carta, if you will, that keep you from drifting. And I think the Magna Carta is about how to repair the rupture in the relationships. I mean, I think that if you really if you really break down why does slavery even exist, it's because relationships have ruptures and no repair. And that might feel like a really big leap, but I think there's a case to be made for that, because everything is a relationship, and when you have one person in bondage to another person, that's not a relationship.
Well, and if it could be argued that if both people were able to be accountable in that space, nobody would be putting anybody on a pedestal.
Yeah, that's right. Then we're sovereign.
Right. Which is what it all comes back down to.
Mm-hmm.
And the intention, the purity of the intention is there. But as fast as the train was going with the funding, so too was having to critically think, or this grandiose idea that there was this one person who was supposed to save or change or manipulate how we were dealing with life.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell a story that I've never told. I mean, I've told this to like 3 people, maybe 4. It's the dream that I had. But before I get into the dream, so that's your key word. If we get down some rabbit holes, you'll be like,
trying
back to the dream.
Trying to focus. We're 2 hours in. We got this. This is beautiful. Keep going.
Everything that is happening today, I had a dream and saw it. And it was in a very metaphorical way that has not made sense to me until I have watched this last couple of months. And I'm like, oh, that was that. That's that. That's that. Where we started. So we had been on the I don't know how to say it, but that project of changing the hearts and the minds of the people. I was a little over a year into that, and I started to realize that I had these inklings, tiny, tiny little inklings, that this whole premise wasn't going to actually, of the covenant in this book that he had written, wasn't actually going to get us there. I didn't know why. I didn't know how it was going to get us there. I just started feeling like it's bigger than this. And there was a couple other little things. And, it's so crazy how how our external worlds just mirror everything of what's going on and what we need to look at on the inside. We had opened up a separate fund, completely separate to O.U.R, any other projects that were going on. It was another 501c3. Neither of us owned it. And there was a guy, and he had a 501c3 out of Alpine, Utah. And the purpose of his 501c3 was to help organizations raise money and accomplish the aim of whatever they were going for. So we said, well, we need to open up another route to raise money and to be able to spend money to accomplish this aim of changing the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. So we parked temporarily under this other guy's 501c3, this nonprofit. And we raised just under $500,000, which would provide us a budget to figure out how to change culture by changing the hearts and the minds of the people.
Okay, so I have a question. That money that you were raised, was it raised under the guise of child sex trafficking? How did you find the money?
When you're so connected with really well people,
you can be like, hey, I have this other thing. Okay.
And we have another thing, and the other thing is actually has the potential of changing culture, and it's really solving this problem.
And you already have this big, huge other business that's successful. We're saving people. Okay.
Yeah. So to pull in $500,000 and raising the funds, I think took us less than like 4 days.
Casual.
And like 3 phone calls.
Wow.
And so
just goes to show how big this train really was. Yeah.
And so one day I get a phone call. Again, we had been working on this project for about a year. And I get a phone call from that organization in Alpine that's holding our money, of the almost 500,000 of the almost $500,000 that we had, we were down to about $220,000. So over a course of a year, we had used almost $250,000 of it. Or in total, we had used about, right around 240 or something like that. And I get a phone call from the accountant, and he says, hey, we've got a problem in your accounting, and there's some deficiencies in your fund. Now, our fund has, like I said, about 220,000, 218,000. I'd have to go look at documents to see exactly what was left in there. But we had just done a P&L every single month. So a few weeks earlier, I had received the P&L report on what was still in there. And we were matching the expenditures to the impact. And so we were trying to be very methodical about it, because we needed to raise millions of more dollars. But this is like our little test slough fund of $500,000 that if we make mistakes, that's fine along the way, as long as by the time we're done with those funds, we've got a really good plan. And so we're about halfway through this, and nothing was really going that great. Nothing that I really was passionate about. And this is what was causing me to start thinking, I don't think this is ever going to... We were making videos about stories that were in his book, The Covenant. And it started to feel like, to me, and this is just to me, it started to feel like what we were really doing is creating a bunch of video and a bunch of messages that would promote the book and all the other things that could, all the other ancillary projects and products that he could promote selling this idea of his.
Technically, then eventually run for office and then for president. Is that where we're going? Yeah. Okay.
And this,
so you're seeing this begin.
And back then there was an open in the Senate at that time frame in like and he was chatting. We were chatting with people.
I was just going to ask you, was he speaking about that to you plainly?
Oh, he wanted to run back then.
Yeah. Okay.
We had a campaign manager, and great. Anybody
totally
should go run for the
if you want to
Senate.
Run for president. Yeah.
Awesome. Go for it. I mean, as far as I thought at the time, like, probably be a good politician. Probably would be a good politician, maybe even today.
I know. And if you look at politics, it might be a perfect place for someone like that.
It's a beautiful pool to go swim in for some people. And I get the phone call and it says there's some deficiencies in your account. I said, well, a couple of weeks ago, the P&L statement said we had about 220. Yeah, I knew the exact number at the time. And I said, so what do you mean deficiencies? Like, a deficiency is like $1 is missing, and a deficiency is like all of it is missing.
Yeah.
So tell me deficiency. Well, we've got lawyers and we've got some other things that are looking into it, and we'll get back to you as soon as we know. I said, well, you understand that when I get off the phone, the first thing I got to do is I got to call Tim. And the first thing he's going to do is get off the phone with me and call you.
Yeah.
And so you might as well just tell me what's going on, because we're not going to delay anything. It's just going to cause more problems. And he says, no, seriously, let me get the accountants that are working on this to like get me some numbers, and we'll call you back. So we get off the phone. I call Tim. I leave him a voicemail. I don't remember where he was at the time, but leave him a voicemail. And I said, hey, we got some deficiencies in our account. I don't know anything more than that. Call me back. So he calls me back like 5 minutes later, and he's like, what's going on? I gave him the story. This is what just happened. And I told him that this is exactly what's going to happen. So I'm going to call you.
Yeah.
And you're going to get off the phone with me.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm calling him right now.
Oh my gosh. And
hung up the phone. And he calls me back a few minutes later, and he's like, they didn't take my phone call. It just went straight to voicemail. And I said, yeah, I figured they would do that. They're like trying to figure out whatever's going on.
Right.
And I said, I'm driving over to their office right now. So I'm heading over to Alpine. And I get there, and a few days goes by with the same story. There's some deficiencies. Well, we end up meeting with their lawyers, and we brought in some lawyers, and we had this whole sit down around this meeting of like, where did $220,000 go? And this organization had a clause
No, no.
in their main operating agreement. And the main operating agreement said that if they could use any funds in any accounts that were underneath their umbrella,
Of course,
to keep their business purposes alive. And what had happened is they had a big donation that was supposed to come in. It was like $700,000. It was supposed to come in from some deal that they were doing in commodities. And so they spent our 220 funding really great organizations in the community.
right?
Their big donation never came in. And therefore they have no way to be able to replenish the monies that they have spent, unbeknownst to us. And so now they're basically like, sorry, if we can raise more money, we will totally get that paid back to you.
Geez.
However, at this time, we don't see that happening. And yeah, we've supported some really great organizations with that.
In the meantime.
Yeah, in the meantime, we've like sent it to really great causes. And we were like, but we have our own cause that we had raised money from these donors.
Yeah.
And so now you're going to have to go back and tell these donors
Yeah.
what you just did.
Yeah.
And what happened is Tim went and told people that I had mismanaged the funds, and that was the breaking of our relationship.
No way.
I had no access to any of the money. He had no access to any of the money. How we were spending that money originally was on his personal credit card and on my personal credit card. And we would have to justify to that organization in Alpine what we had spent the money on, because they're responsible to the IRS.
Oh my gosh.
And for sending us a reimbursement. And so all of a sudden I have no access to any of this. And so the question becomes, well, why would he do that? And here's where it gets really fun. When we had first raised that money, we had sat in a meeting, and President Ballard had said, I like this original business plan. I mean, this is going back like a year earlier. And he said, I like this original business plan. I don't really fully understand it. And it was I had written this original business plan on how to change the hearts and the minds of the people. It's probably the crappiest business plan that has ever been written, ever.
You wrote
history.
it.
And I wrote
it. Is it the same whiteboard situation? It kind of started like that?
No, but the whiteboard did stem from all of this.
Okay.
I can contextualize that whole whiteboard.
The whole thing.
Yeah. And so President Ballard had called Tim up one day. We had just raised the money. And he calls Tim up, and he says, this is a true story. He says, Tim, I just have a feeling that you need to make sure that all that money that you guys have for this project is set in its own separate account, not intermingled with their main funds. He's like, I just have this feeling. I just have a feeling about it. So just make sure that happens. And so Tim called up that Alpine organization, and I largely did the phone and the texting.
Right.
I still have text messages telling them about this.
Let's move this over.
And just have it. And we just told them straight up.
Yeah.
Like, I just went in there and told that Alpine group, I said, look, we kind of are... I'm trying to keep everyone happy on this project. Yeah. And this is what he feels, that President Ballard feels. So just open up a new account for us so that you guys cannot intermingle it. And they said, okay, that's fine. Have Tim meet us down. If we open up a new account, then we'll put you guys signers on the account. And you can also have the visible access to see. And then we will still be the accountants on it, but we will separate it from our main funds.
Right.
And I said, great. And Tim said, no, I don't want that to happen. What I want you to do is I want you to take that full amount like just under $500,000. I want you to take that and I want you to transfer that over to my personal LLC at Chase Bank.
Mm.
And
Did you know that happened?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And at the Alpine organization, they said, Tim, we're not doing that. We cannot release $500,000 over to your LLC because once we release it, you get to do whatever you want with it. And we are still responsible at the IRS of what you did with it. So you would have to send a whole expenditure plan accounting for how you're going to do it so that if you break that agreement and how you're going to spend that money, well, then we can just tell the IRS, well, they promised to spend it in this way according to this plan. Well, we didn't have a plan looking that far out. And so they said, well, we're not going to send the money over to your LLC. And so they said, but what we will do is we'll keep the money in the Wells Fargo account. We'll open it up and you can come down and be a signer on it.
Okay.
And you can watch and look at the funds and it'll only be sitting in your own account and we'll never move money out of it or anything. And we'll create that agreement.
And only you, Hugh and Tim can pull.
And only Hugh and Tim can pull. I didn't want to be a signer on that account.
Yeah.
Just something inside of me was like, don't touch the money. Don't get near the money.
Yeah.
This stuff is so sensitive with the IRS and everything else.
Right.
Anyways, I'm just like, look, I'm the media guy. I'm the project manager guy. I don't want to do any of the financing. I'll turn my credit card in and you can reimburse me. And then I know that we really spent it on the right things.
Yes.
And if you don't feel like there's something that we spent right, then don't reimburse me and I'll eat it myself.
Right. You don't want to have these funds. You don't want to have the availability of these funds. You don't want to have the responsibility. But here we are. For some reason, he put both of you on this.
He didn't even put us both on it. He said, meet me down at Wells Fargo.
Okay.
And I'll put whoever you guys want to be on it.
Okay.
And I said, no, just make it Tim.
Okay.
And Tim said, I don't want to do that. I don't know why he said, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
He just said, just send the money over to my for-profit. And they said, we can't.
Yeah.
You don't have an expenditure plan. And we're not going to be held liable for however you want to spend it once it leaves our account.
Yes.
And so he just never showed up to the appointment at Wells Fargo. So the money remained.
So it stayed there. Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. It stays in the main account mingled. A year later, it gets spent.
So do we know where it went?
I heard that one of the projects went to the Deborah Bonner Choir.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like one of the chunks of the fund, like $20,000 or something like that, went.
Oh, so not the $220,000.
Oh no! They spent it like amongst all kinds of really good organizations that needed extra support and funding that helped the community out and do really great things.
But Tim didn't want to be seen as somebody who didn't follow the rules, so he just put it on you. And that was the first. Was that the first time that happened, or was that the first one that was big enough that was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't not be this guy's punching bag.
First and only time it happened.
Okay. And then you were like, I'm out.
First and last time it happened. Oh, I mean, so we're in the meeting with the lawyers and they're saying, this is where we spent the money. And we're like, why did you do that? And they were like, the money was mingled. And then I was like, oh my gosh. The money never got moved over to its own account. Yeah. And the flashback comes back from like a year later and like, that old guy, President Ballard, I guess he got a real download.
Yeah.
Like, that was like a legit thing.
That was a revelation.
Yeah. I was like, oh, this guy's not too far off.
Wow.
Like, he's pretty smart.
Interesting.
And so that was an interesting dynamic to that. And what also was really interesting is, it was like 4 or 5 days later and Tim and I were done.
Wow.
And he didn't take my phone calls. He didn't do it. We had a meeting coming up to go report on this whole project with President Ballard and let him know how it was going. I was kicked off the invite for the meeting and didn't really understand what was going on. I drove over to his house and he just was like, all of a sudden there was a bunch of different things, like just goofy things. I can't even remember what they were. There was like 3 or 4 things where it was, well, you made this video for, there was a video for Sean Hannity And he's like, and you didn't put my name in that video. So there was a guy who was doing a painting for it. It was this project that was going on to try to potentially raise some money for Operation Underground Railroad. And this painting was being done by John McNaughton, and John McNaughton knows Sean Hannity. And Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck are kind of competitors, and so maybe Sean Hannity might not support Operation Underground Railroad if he knows that Glenn's already been pushing this organization for years. So John, the artist says, well, why don't we send a video over that I'm doing this commissioned piece to raise organization for rescuing children, but we're not going to let's not mention anything of what organization it is, but just say, I'm doing a piece and I would love to see if you would promote it on your Sean Hannity show. It's like a 2-minute long video. The only person that's going to see this video is Sean Hannity. So we make the video. I get it into a text format, send it over to John McNaughton. John texts it over to Sean. Nothing really came of it. I don't know why nothing came of it. And Tim was like, you didn't even put my name in it. You didn't put OUR's name in it. And basically like, I think you're drifting. And I'm like, drifting from what?
Yeah. To what?
To what?
To where?
Yeah.
So that kind of was the beginning of...
I started getting phone calls. So what happened is Tim got another guy that was working at kind of doing some of his secretary type work. And that guy contacted some of my family members. This is like a couple days later. And
just all unraveled so fast.
Oh, it was overnight.
Oh my gosh.
Which who else's story unraveled overnight?
Yeah.
And so this guy called, like one of his secretary guys calls up my family member and says, hey, we're really worried about Hugh. And my family members are like, what do you mean? What's going on? And they're like, well, we think he might be suicidal. And family members are like, what are you talking about? What's happened? Well, he got in trouble and he had to get let go. He misused a lot of money, and we're just concerned and worried about him, and we don't know what's happening. We're trying to get to the bottom of it, but we just wanted to let you know.
Oh my gosh. Just for the record, the person that we were talking about that this is exploded overnight is Tim. Yes. But the corruption.
Oh, just the lies, just the deception behind it.
So it explained to me, did you go to him and you said, how dare you? Why would you do this? Or did it just start evolving so fast you couldn't even say that?
He called everyone that I had contacts with, everyone.
So he was just always trying to keep one foot into the story before you.
Hugh is compromised. Hugh cannot be trusted. Don't take his phone calls. I'm calling other directors. The Navy SEAL Dave Lopez was running the operations program. We had become really close friends. We're still really close friends today. He called me a couple years later after he got into a sideways situation. The same thing happened to him a couple years later. He called me up. He said, I apologize. The information...
All because he was too proud of saying that he didn't move the funds.
Just didn't move the funds. And we could have gone in and said...
Sorry.
The funds were still used for good purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you're talking about something that's going to require tens of millions of dollars to change culture. And we're in like a little test fund of a couple $400,000, $500,000.
Just a simple humility. Like, I'm sorry, I fucked up a little bit here.
It'll never happen.
Instead, I'm going to destroy my right-hand man's life.
Yeah. And
to hide it. And people are going to believe me.
And they did. I mean, I lost like a couple hundred followers overnight on Instagram and Facebook and everything. Cause I was never promoting myself. I was never putting myself out there, but we were always together. So people were just slowly starting to follow me, and they were big supporters of anything that the work was doing. And then all of a sudden it was like nobody would touch me with a 10-foot pole. So I took a gig. Well, I did end up getting the gig, but So now I got to go like figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do? And a buddy of mine had a really cool project going on. And so he said, well, here, I'll I'll give you a little gig to do some media for us and all that stuff. He got an email from the secretary that said, hey, we went and met with President Ballard, and President Ballard says, don't touch this guy with a 10-foot pole.
Oh my gosh.
I mean,
Destroyed.
President Ballard still has no idea today that like I had nothing to do with it. I didn't try to, I just, it devastated me. And the challenge is that especially back then, he was so powerful. He just call up anybody. Mustang Medicine had a deal with the AG's office to where I was going to do a presentation, you know, like what we do with your like at your retreats, and it was just going to be a company wellness kind of half-day event, and the AG's office called me up like a week before they were supposed to attend the event. So they're like reviewing their week schedule. And the secretary to the AG said, yeah, this is this organization called Mustang Medicine, and it's going to be a really great thing. We want to bring the whole team down there. We think that there might be some good use case for Mustang Medicine to be out in the community, and, you know, suicide prevention could maybe benefit from this. And they had some ideas, and it was really early and initial. And so I was kind of taking anything that might work. And then the AG was like, wait, that's the Hugh Vail that and he had some version of the story about me and the money and everything. And he's like, yeah, we can't do that. We can't touch that guy with a 10-foot pole. He had misused the money and everything, and he's not trustworthy. So the AG's office canceled everything, and all these other opportunities, like, you know, they're all attached to each other because you're trying to stack and build, and
of course,
and let one thing lead to another. And yeah, that just followed me around for
how many years?
Oh, I mean, for probably 2 years.
And that was when? What year was that?
That was 2017, 2018.
You never once said a thing.
No, I didn't say anything.
Until now.
Until now. Yeah.
Until you're on the other side and you're in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where I'm in the field is like, it's like, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the worst thing.
I'm so sorry. Especially knowing you and your heart. And how much you meant to him and how much you desire. I mean, your whole life, all I know, the Hugh Vail I know, is that you've dedicated your whole life to soften and open the hearts of men.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you do that now by helping people return to their wholeness.
Yeah.
The Greek word for healing means to return to wholeness. And what takes us from our wholeness is when these types of experiences happen. We feel abandoned, we feel abused, we feel betrayed, we feel rejected. And then we pick up a story in our prefrontal cortex and says, well, then I must be worth abandoning or abusing or rejecting. And that fractures me from me because I accept this story. And then the healing process is the returning and say, well, I have a role to play in all of that, but I've actually been whole and I've been complete this entire time. And that's a process. That's like really, really challenging to...
Years and years.
Years, you know, and I'm still, not because of that situation, but I have other things that I'm still trying to integrate into my life. And
it's such an initiation to say, this is the path. The accountability path is such an initiation to really seeing. If you're going to really see your wholeness, all the shadows will be exposed. And
you know, what's funny is that I had really been really in my personal life at that time in my life is, I didn't have the language around it, but I was essentially saying, I want to like look at all my shadows and I want to see what's keeping me from me. I didn't have that clean a language around it, But in my own personal life, that was the growth that I was looking for. And I believed that if I could go down that way, that could potentially change the hearts and the minds of the people by softening their hearts. If you could look at your shadows and be okay with all of it. And again, I didn't have that kind of awareness in that language, but in my soul, there was something that was like, let's look at everything. And then this whole situation shows up, and it showed me all my shadows.
And how you were going to handle, move through, experience, heal from something that you couldn't control. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a dream.
So I'm devastated when I find out after it really comes out that I'm going to be the fall guy for this. Yeah. And I walked into my house and it's one of those moments where you do end up on your knees. I wasn't praying or anything. I was just on my knees because it was too heavy to stand. And I think the hardest part about it is that it's like this thing that you believe, you have this relationship that's all based in fact. Mm. We have all this evidence of how well we work together and in this friendship, and we're vacationing and we're sharing all of our embarrassing stories, and you're like building genuine connection and friendship, and it feels like the world is predictable and factual, and all of a sudden it feels like it's been a complete fantasy, and it just like wrecks your reality. And that's a hard moment. I felt like I had been abandoned, abused, cheated on, like
rejected,
all the stuff. And I'm sitting there, and it's late at night, and I've just been crying, and it was the betrayal of the friendship. I felt like I had given over so much of me. And I think we do that in inappropriate ways when we put someone on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And so I had maybe given over too much of me, and then it had just been trashed. Mm-hmm. And somehow I made it into bed, and I fell asleep, and I ended up having a dream. And I typically don't dream, but when I do dream,
it's prophetic.
It feels very like, okay, that was a thing.
Right.
And I don't usually have interpretation for it, but I'll write it down. So that night I ended up having a dream, and I woke up. It didn't make me feel any better. I didn't have any clarity around it, but this was the dream. The dream was as I was sailing on a ship, and I was out to sea. And and we were on these I was on an old boat. It was like a sailing boat, like made of wood, and like from the 1600s or the 1700s. And as I was sailing, I had a destination to go to, and it felt like it was very important for me to arrive at whatever this port was. And it seemed like it was across the world. I didn't have any clarity, any details on that. It just seemed like we all have our own ship to sail, and it was like I had mine. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel like I had that at that time in my life. I felt like I was sailing his ship, Tim's ship. Mm-hmm. And so I think there was some significance there for me to be like, we all have our own ships.
Yes.
And sometimes we can climb aboard someone else's to help them on their journey, but you still have your own ship to sail. And I had some dear friends that were on that ship with me. And we were going to some port. It felt like it was in England, which is interesting because that's where William Wilberforce is from, and he grew up in a port city called Hull, or just outside of there. And so it felt like it was going there. And then I looked off further out to sea, and you remember in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, and there was that big red ship that the government army had, and it was like beautiful. I can't remember the name of it.
No, but I remember massive
ship, beautiful,
compared to
red,
the pirates.
Yeah. And Tim was sailing that ship further out to sea. It looked like it was miles and miles away, just on the edge of the horizon. And as I was watching in my dream, I'm sailing my little ship, and I see that massive red ship out there, and I see a storm come, and this huge storm envelops their ship, and you can't see it anymore. And then in my dream, all of a sudden, I'm sailing through driftwood, and that ship has absolutely gotten destroyed in this storm. And Tim is on a piece of driftwood, and he floats up to in front of us and then over to the shore. And if you've been to Hawaii, you know how some of the shores are like volcanic, sharp rock? And that's the shore that he's landing on. And he gets off this piece of driftwood, and he looks over, and all of his clothes in my dream are just tattered, and he looks beat up. And he looks over at me, and he's got this look on his face like, dude, help a brother out. And my instinct in my dream as I started to turn the ship to go pick him up, like, yeah, you can be a jerk, but I mean, there's a certain level where it's like, you still got to help other people out. I'm just not a like pitchfork kind of judge and punish guy.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I got to go pick him up. And as soon as I started to turn the ship over, I heard this voice like speak from the PA system in the heavens or something like that. And it says, you can go and pick him up, but if you do, you will be late for where you're sailing to at the port that you're going to. And so I had to make this choice within me. And I decided that I wasn't going to be late for where I was going. And in my dream, we just kind of looked at each other, and I kind of gave him this look like, I'm sorry, but I can't.
Yeah.
And he kind of gave a look like, I think I'm going to die. I think I'm almost drowning, and I don't know how I'm going to survive. And I just kept sailing. And then as soon as I made the choice to get back on my course, stay on my course, I heard this voice again, this same place, like say, I don't remember the exact words. I'd have to look it up in my journal, but it was something to the effect of like, you've made the right choice for your own course that you're sailing, and this is a part of his, and this actually will bring him back to himself. Like, this is all happening for him.
Of course.
And at the time, I'm like, the hell does that mean?
That's a lot for back then.
And so he's climbing up on the rocks. I'm watching him as we're sailing by, and he's climbing up on the rocks, and the rocks are so sharp. There's this volcanic basalt rock with the sea salt water, and his hands are bleeding as he's climbing up, and he's just getting these little cuts and these little fissures everywhere in his tattered clothes. And I see that the heavens all of a sudden open up, and there's this like stairwell that comes out of the heavens, and his wife comes down and walks down these like little stair clouds and picks him up off of those like volcanic rocks, and she holds him like a little child in her arms, and she walks up, and then the like
wow
and I'm like, what in the world is that? Well, I'm still dreaming, and all of a sudden my dream takes me over to, we're no longer in the ocean, I'm no longer sailing anywhere. It's like that metaphorical part has now ended, and now I'm over at the point of the mountain, kind of where the original O.U.R office was.
Okay.
The CrossFit gym that they have. I'm like right over in that area. And I'm looking over the valley out into, he lives on the west side of the freeway, and I'm kind of looking in the direction of where his house is. And it's almost like where everyone does all the paragliding off that hill.
Yep.
Old Widowmaker, the locals will know. And it's almost like I'm up there, and I'm looking over, and I see news articles start raining down onto his house. And they're from the New York Times, and they're from the New York Post, and they're from the Salt Lake Tribune, and they're from other like news publications that I don't see anywhere. And the news articles are basically saying something to the effect of like the hero isn't what you thought he was. The man who rescues children from sexual exploitation is exploiting women. And I'm seeing this, and I'm like, what in the world? And then I can see inside of their house. In my dream, I can see inside of their house, and the phone keeps ringing, and it's ringing for his wife, and she won't answer the phone. And all of a sudden, one phone call, like there's a ring. For some reason, this call comes through, and she decides to pick it up. It's like important enough or influential enough. I don't know why or what, but she picks it up. And there's someone on the other line, and he's explaining to her the relationship between his wife and Tim. And then another phone call comes in, and she's just like, I don't know what to believe. We've got all these articles that are coming down. Mm-hmm. We've got these people are trying to convince me that he's this horrible guy. This is the sentiment and the feeling that's in my dream, which you have to understand. This is like
years ago.
This is years ago. And
even before these things were happening.
Oh, he's like
not even there yet.
He's not even near there. Yeah. And especially in my world, in my perception.
Right.
So none of this makes sense to me. In fact, it's quite confusing when I wake up. But his wife decides that despite of everything, and I don't know what she's going to decide. Like, I haven't talked to them or anything. This is just the world according to Hugh and whatever need to make sense for me. But she decides that she's going to stay with him. And all of it cleans up. Like the news articles kind of float away. The storm of news headlines and everything floats away. And it seems like 10 years goes by. And I run into him. And he has like a green tour guide vest on. And he's giving tours of his book, The American Covenant, over on the East Coast. And he's like the tour guide. And that's what he actually does. Like, this is the thing that he does, and he's been doing for a while, is he gives tours of the American Covenant, and he walks you through Gettysburg, and he walks you through Virginia, and he walks you through Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's house, and John Adams' house. And he's saying, these are the founding fathers, and these are the pilgrims that set this nation, and they created this covenant. And he gives, in fact, the news clip that Fox News came out with on Fox News 13, and he's standing there. I call it the tight pant rant. Right? He's got his little tight pants on, and he's like, share it, right?
That's whole so thing. Random. That's where? That's one.
That's in Boston, and he's on the tour.
Oh my gosh, I wondered where that came
covenant.
From.
Uh-huh.
What? So he still does them today?
He still does them today.
Amongst all the other things that he's supposed to be doing, that he's busy with.
Yeah, and his genius is actually doing those tours. I've gone on the tours. Worth going on, actually.
Do you think that has anything to do with like the tours that he does to the tours, like of finding and doing these drops to find these children?
No, I think he does a pretty good job at keeping them separate, at least the time that I
Well, it's just interesting that he goes and like, anyway, this concept of touring, right?
He's definitely a tour. I call him Tour Guide Timmy. That's
because he was lighting these people, mm-hmm. these guides to these tours to find these children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in my dream, what I see is that he's got this green, almost like, you'd give a tour at like
a Boy
Mount
Scout.
Vernon. Yeah. Like a Boy Scout
like
thing.
Russell from Up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he's finished with his tour. And in my dream, we like kind of cross paths, and now enough time has gone by, and I got my own thing going on in my dream. And so I like, I can see that there's a difference in him. It's kind of like this authentic version that originally started out is now back.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to do anything big.
Yeah.
And he just like wants to do the thing that he's really good at and the thing he's always been passionate about, which I think it's the book, because the book's been
That's
this
the
thing.
beginning.
It's the beginning of
Yes.
it. And it's where it ends in my dream. And he's really good. And the coolest part, I think the coolest part that I saw was he actually had a really good, healthy relationship with his wife. I'm not saying they don't have a good, I'm not going to comment on that, but in my dream, I saw that they had a really, like, a genuine, good, authentic partnership where they had like been to hell together and they had like chosen in to be with each other.
Yeah.
And whatever pain, his children were there at this part. They were like in this big van. And they were going somewhere, and wherever they were in this parking lot, I happened to be like walking by. And so I got to see the growth of his children, and they had kids, and there was like this whole lifestyle that was happening, and they were all very happy. And he was just like, life now is what I always wanted it to be. And it like had just all been cleaned up, and the ego didn't die. He had made peace with it.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I don't know if it's even important to tell that, but now it's really easy to look at it now. In fact, I had the couple friends that I had told this dream about years ago when the news articles were all coming down and a new one was coming out. These couple friends that I had told called me up and they were like, "This is like your dream." And
yeah,
I was like, "This is crazy."
I mean, I don't even know if it's the idea of importance other than the intricate weaving of the story. Your story, you sharing your story at this time, what we're seeing done in real time, what we feel about it, what the world feels about it, how we feel we've been manipulated. And to have you come on and share your story intermingled with obviously this dream. And one thing I'll say really quickly is you can see that in his wife. She's there.
Totally.
She's right there by his side.
I get a lot of, I don't know why people reach out to me, but they're like, "Do you think they're going to stay together?" And I never explain my answer why, but I'm like, "Yep, I do." And they're like, "How? She should leave. She,
Right.
blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Nah, personally, I think they'll stay together." And I think they should.
Yeah.
From everything that I've had, everything that has happened in my life and this dream and everything else, of course, I think they should.
Yeah.
I think it works out.
Yeah. Wow. Incredible and sad and upsetting. And, as much as we understand that if people are truly on this path of healing and accountability and awareness, forgiveness is a beautiful tool. But we're in a spot right now, and sharing your voice and uncovering those painful pieces and also intricately perfect pieces to who you are now. First of all, thank you so much for sharing all this, Hugh. I think it's so important, especially now as we see women come forward. These women coming forward that, for context, were his wives in some of these undercover drops to rescue children. And maybe you can talk more on this, but whether we understand how it got to this point or not, it got to this point where Tim had, I'm going to use the words groomed and manipulated these women to believe that they had to do these certain things in order to stay undercover. Oh, if you're undercover as my wife, this is what we do together. If you're undercover as my wife, you do this, we do this together. And now that all this has come out, there's some legal lawsuits that have come out, and these women have decided to stay anonymous. And it's ruined their lives. And a lot of these situations, they've gotten divorces. They've been completely manipulated and groomed, and you have had contact with these women. maybe tell us a little bit about that and where we're at with that situation and where they're at, and where we're at. That's really at the story with the story.
Yeah, I have spoken with a few of them, and they got some had heard about my story,
Mm-hmm.
and I had received a phone number of one of the women that was like, she's struggling and she could probably use somebody to chat with who understands, because just like what had happened with me, I didn't have anyone to call. I didn't have anyone to tell my story to. I didn't have anyone to tell my version of the story to. Of course, I had close friends and family that were like, I could chat with, but they didn't really fully get it, and they didn't fully understand it, because there's just certain things that I don't know. I don't think anybody understood how much I'd put them up on a pedestal. I don't think people understood how insecurely attached, like,
Well, when also
trauma bonded I was there.
when you're groomed, it can be, there's multiple ways. And these women, nobody can understand just how much trauma can go through something feeling like it's real, and then it's not. And then being told, oh, wait, what have I done? Or feeling, what have I done? And to be able to have somebody to come to talk to, can
and that's
really be life or death.
Yeah, that's honestly what I went through.
Exactly.
I was like, what did I do?
Totally.
How did I screw up this bad? Like, and now I look back on it and I'm like, that had nothing to do with me.
Of course.
But at the time it had everything to do with me. And and so I chatted with them, and we had some good conversation from one woman. Then she found it to be very helpful, because I'm also not in a place of like blaming or judging or getting the pitchfork out.
Right.
Trying to say like, hey, this is what I learned. Not saying this is what you need to learn, but this is what I learned. And that seemed to be very helpful for one, which then turned into another phone call with one of the other women, which turned into another phone call with one of the other women. And so, I just said, hey, look, I had a therapist that I went to. He's done he was a therapist for a little while. I don't know to the exact extent, but he had worked with like Elizabeth Smart during some of her healing process. I also know that he worked with some other people that were friends of mine, and that he became highly recommended to me. And so I went and saw him as I was going through mine pain and trying to figure things out. And I said, let me give you his phone number, and you should start talking to a therapist. And so I introduced him, and I think now 4 of the women are actually proactively seeking him. I think the others have found other sources for them. I haven't chatted with them, and I don't try to get too involved in it by any means, but yeah, 4 of them are working with the same therapist that I work through, and I have followed up with them. Again, I don't ask them their stories. I don't ask them their details. I don't get into that. It's like, I just want you to feel seen. I want you to feel heard. I want you to feel understood, but you don't have to tell me the details. And also I don't need the details.
Yeah.
But what you do need to do is feel seen and heard. And I think this is a therapist that can do that. So as I followed up and said, hey, the guy that I introduced you to is that helping? Every single one of them just starts, like, they just start crying and on the phone, and they're like, it has been so helpful to work with somebody who had some understanding, from my story. And also he's a brilliant therapist. He doesn't, you got to go through your stages of like being validated and feeling seen and heard, but then helping you start to move closer and closer through the grieving process, the accountability process. And he was very, very integral in that for me. And they've begun that process. And what they've said is that it's been extremely helpful. That to me is where I feel so much more motivated than the legal side. I'm like, let's go work on the healing side if you all need to go do your legal approach, just leave me out of that, because I don't think healing comes from that.
Yeah.
I think we want healing to come from
Justice.
We want justice.
We want healing to come from justice, when really the justice is the justice within our own accountability.
It totally has to come from that. And it's just like you said earlier, is like we have these deep feelings of resentment that we're trying to, well, you talked about forgiveness, and the opposite of forgiveness. And this is one of the great lessons that I learned from my entire experience, is that the opposite of forgiveness is resentment.
Mm.
So what I started asking myself is, do I feel resentment? Because I was telling everyone, oh, I have forgiven. But then when I was asked the question, do you feel resentment? I was like, yep, I do.
Yeah.
And you can't have both of them at the same time. And the word resent, RE means again, and sent, SENT, is the Latin word for to feel. Mm. And ment is the Latin word for mind. Mm. So how I'm telling the story about what happened to me in my prefrontal cortex in my mind causes me to re-feel all the abandonment and the pain and the extreme unfairness that I have. And so then all my emotions come up, and my anger comes to try to protect my boundaries, and my rage comes out, and I want fairness and I want justice.
Well, and then ultimately it connects you to that cord. That cord of energy is continued to stay with that situation, with that experience and that person, which then what leads you to not being sovereign. Mm-hmm. And it just gives that person more power.
Totally.
Along the way.
Totally. And so it was like, I had to go look at all of those emotions that were, I believe all of our emotions are trying to lead us to our sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And I was misinterpreting my anger. I was misinterpreting my sadness as a justification to punish what felt so extremely unfair. Mm. And I think that's what happens. I think that's why we go get a pitchfork, is because I have all these emotions, and it's like, I will get justice.
Yeah.
And I rethink about what happened to me, and I get angry again. And then it's like, well, I'm going to go find my own way to use my voice to get my pitchfork and bring justice to the table. And that, I think, is a misinterpretation of emotions and what emotions are actually for. I think it's very common. But for me, what I realized in my sadness is that the message of sadness is that the relationship I care about so deeply is leaving. And so when I started realizing that relationship I cared so deeply about was leaving, then it made sense why I was sad. Mm-hmm. And anger.
It's something more layered.
Yeah.
And even underneath that, it's the layer of who's leaving. Who is it? Is it a mother wound? Is it a father wound?
Yeah,
is it you
right.
leaving your true self?
Yeah.
It's always layered.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, well, this relationship between Tim and I feels like it's leaving. And then there was grief, because I believe the message of grief is the relationship has left, and now I have to figure out how to move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it's this whole process of like, oh, crap, how do I move on? Mm-hmm. And you move on by going within, just like you said earlier. That's how I moved on. Mm-hmm. Is I was like, well, I better go figure out where all the places I gave myself away and how to like call those parts back in and make peace with those parts, because I needed those relationships to be enough.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what feels like it's not enough?
Yeah.
And let me go look at that and see if I can find my enoughness in that.
Yeah.
And that's what, for me, took years.
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily has to take years. I think if I would have found the community that we have today, it goes much, much quicker. Mm-hmm. But years ago, I wasn't exposed to any of this, and so it just was a long like trial and error, and sleep it off and try to make sense of it, and
go through the whole cycle over and over again to try to understand why me, but really, the gift of it all. And this comes back to the women and why you have decided to share your story. It doesn't even have to do with Tim and everything exploding and everything coming to fruition and all these things being exposed. It's actually ultimately to help support these women.
Help support the women. And this is, I wish, oh gosh, I think this is actually a beautiful opportunity for the community to return to wholeness, and we can practice going to that place beyond right and wrong and meeting in the field and helping Tim return to his wholeness.
Yeah.
Because the truth is like, I mean, the last that I knew of him, he was like most of us. He didn't know his wholeness, and he needs these other things outside of him to make him good enough and make him whole enough. And I don't think that's true. I don't think O.U.R makes him great. I don't think rescuing kids makes him great. In fact, if anything, I think it's kind of all brought up his shadows. And I think that's beautiful. So it's like, okay, well, let's go integrate the shadow and let's go find the parts that you judge of yourself. I think it's very challenging because he has to do that now in a very public setting. Mm-hmm. Some people have to do that in a public setting.
And also what a gift, like, thank you. We can give him gratitude because with him doing it publicly, we are all, if we choose to, heal. Because in some way or another, all of us that have a testimony of him, mm-hmm. or that have donated dollars, mm-hmm. or have believed in this thing outside of ourselves, we gave a part of that away.
Yeah, I don't think all is lost. I think that's like a very disparaging belief.
And the idea of saving children is still so alive. Mm-hmm. It's still so, and in fact, look at what we've been able to create. If you look at the donation dollars, you look at how many people know of O.U.R.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the molecule and the frequency of what it is that we're doing here as a community, without anybody on a pedestal, without anybody being the face necessarily. Like, we can come back to that and say, okay, let's do better. Mm-hmm. Rather than being like, well, all hope is lost. Look, now we see an abuser is running an anti-abusing situation.
Yeah, that doesn't help. That doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
I'm actually very, very opposed to
putting pitchforks.
To putting any fuel on that. I completely disregard and disassociate from any of that narrative.
Because what does it do? I mean,
Nothing.
All of it, everything that we've been learning. In fact, this goes along actually with a lot of what's going on in the climate. And I find it so interesting that so much is being brought to light. And in the lightness, people, I understand, I have sympathy and empathy for it. That it's disheartening. It can be disheartening. People are like, no way, look at this corruption. Mm-hmm. There's no way to turn from this. Instead of saying, look what's being seen. Look at what the shadow that we've revealed. Mm-hmm. What a gift. Mm-hmm. So that we can know better. We can see. That is wholeness. Like you said, we have to see the light in the dark.
Yeah.
And what a gift that we've been able to use this as an example.
Yeah. I mean, a bunch of darkness the light has brought a bunch of shadows out.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's a hard thing particularly for the women, because they're, for whatever reasons they've chosen, I don't communicate with them enough to answer this question, but for whatever reason at this time, they have decided to stay anonymous. I completely understand that. I wanted to stay anonymous for a long time, and I didn't do any, feel like I had deserved any of that pain that I was going through. Again, today I'm extremely grateful for it, and I learned from it. I see my role in it, but I think the thing that I am most focused on is how do you take this rupture within mm-hmm. our community? Mm-hmm. How do you take this rupture within the work of rescuing children? Mm-hmm. Because now it's like, well, who do I trust? Mm-hmm. Now who's going to go rescue the kids? Mm-hmm. Now and it's like, what if we take this rupture and we go through the repair process? And there is a repair process that can happen, and it's actually quite simple and easy to do. But it's like that has to be brought to the surface. And I think this is our opportunity to actually repair as a community, to repair as a place that's safe for our kids. I think that's the thing where this all started.
Yeah.
Is like, why am I donating my time and my money and my resources? Well, essentially, it's to protect my children.
Yeah.
Because if we can be rescuing all of the kids and we can make the world a better place, and it's the healing, it's the returning to the wholeness.
Well, and it's the argument that it's not that it's the only thing we can do. However, it's where we can start, and that's inside the home.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we've donated thousands and thousands of dollars individually to helping people, to helping children to come home, and that feels lost and you feel hopeless, it comes back to what we can do here inside our homes with our children, providing safe experiences for them, teaching them wholeness now, rather than raising children that have to heal ruptures outside of themselves.
Yes.
And a lot of people aren't going to like that answer.
No.
Because they want it bigger. They want it godlike. They want to strap on their armor and run into the darkness, when really, like, that is just a reflection of what's happening here. And it starts within the home. It starts within the home. And if we can allow ourselves to detach, learn the lessons and detach from the energy of what has been causing the pain in the first place, imagine what we can do and bring the energy where we can bring that energy. And this is where I'm so grateful that you came to me, Hugh, because a couple weeks ago you said, I have this idea. I would love to create why can't I think of the word? We're funding,
like a fund,
like a fundraiser. Thank you.
Like a little Venmo account.
A little Venmo fundraiser. He came to me and said, I'd love to somehow create a fundraiser for these women to help pay for their therapy. And that's when I actually approached him and I said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. I usually do a fundraiser at least once a year around my birthday, which is in January. And this will be probably coming out a few weeks before then, this episode. But then I thought, why don't we go beyond that and hopefully help not only these women, but also victims in all aspects and all over the world. Whoever gets to hear this, whoever's willing to listen to this for over 3 hours, to get the codes of accountability through your story with Tim. Because there's no other story like that out here right now. Everybody else is out for blood. And we can have empathy for that because of the newness. But for one reason, I believe it's many reasons, you were paving this path earlier. So eventually you could come here and teach all of us to come back to wholeness through your story. And that takes bravery and courage and love. And so with that gift, first of all, so much gratitude. And also I'm opening up my Venmo account for donations, and I will have them open for 2 weeks because I think I might break this episode up in 2 episodes. I haven't decided yet, but I'll have them open for 2 weeks, and you can just contact my Venmo and I will have it here in the show notes, along with, I really want to write down all of the incredible books you offered and all those different amazing insights. But my Venmo is Sadie-Sabin. And all of the money, it's at zero now, and I'll make sure to have all that, and all the money will be donated to the therapist who is giving this therapy to, how many is he working with now?
Right now he's working with 4 of the women. And here's actually what's really, really incredible is that some of the women didn't have the funds to get the therapy. And he said, that's fine. You just need therapy. I don't know why he did that. Just, he's semi-retired right now. He's only takes clients on if you know him, and you kind of have to do this whole intake form. And so he and I still chat just randomly, like once a year. We'll catch up with each other's lives. And we were having, how it all like came together is we were having one of those updated chats, and I was like, dude, you should totally, I'm going to connect you with them, and will you open up your books and take whoever can come? And he said, I'll do that. And then he's like, I'm looking for service in my own life. And so tell them not to worry about the money. Tell them I'm just going to do that. And I will give them weekly sessions for 6 months.
Wow.
And it's $150 a session. And four of the women have said, yeah, I'll take that. And it just kind of came one at a time, and they're all in their own process. All I know is that it's going well. The women that I've chatted with some of them I've never even met in person.
Yeah.
And they're just like, thank you so much. He's incredible. So,
do we have a number of how many women have come forward?
I've heard a couple of different numbers, that have come forward. As right now, as it stands, I think it's 6.
Okay.
Is what have come forward. There were more, but there were some, as I heard it, there were some agreements that were made that one reason or another they decided to settle outside of it.
Okay.
And I don't know the details on that, but I think the therapist is worth, I mean, if we have a little bit of extra money and just as a community we can, just put some money towards it. He's not asking for the money. He's not needing the money. This was my idea to say to him, I want you to be fairly compensated, because 6 months is a lot. And that's a long time. And, and the women just aren't they've got their finances all wrapped up in the legal fees and everything that's going there. And I was just like, let's prioritize the healing.
And, attorneys, can be thousands an hour. Mm-hmm. My attorneys for my particular lawsuit, one of them was like, we're like $500 an hour. And just for those who, are curious, there are some, I don't even know if we need to get into the details, but the lawsuits are actually public. Like, you can go online and read what these women are fighting over or fighting against, which is essentially being manipulated into believing that certain acts had to happen in order to be undercover. And they played the wives of Tim in some of these different, what would you call?
They refer to him as a couple's ruse.
Yeah.
Which I had actually never, my whole time, I had never heard of that. And I feel like there's even a different Tim.
Yeah, I didn't even know.
Time.
I didn't even know that was going on, because all of the videos that I was a part of. Now, I stopped donating to O.U.R. a couple years ago just because I had a feeling. Mm-hmm. I just a feeling. A few of my other influencer or entrepreneur friends had the same, and I just remember it being more like Navy SEAL vibes, like all going in bros, like going in. I didn't know that this was a couple ruse thing. So as it's come out, these women and what they were manipulated to believe needed to be done. Okay, so these couples ruse just started, I don't even know, maybe a couple years ago. And these women have been manipulated and groomed into believing that these would help rescue children.
Yeah, in the original days, what was actually going on is you would take a guy who would pretend to be or propose to be a billionaire, a very wealthy guy. And so he had a role to play. And then Tim would come in as this billionaire's assistant. And then the billionaire would be saying, I want to go get a big party. And so then Tim had to work with, I got to get young kids. I got to get these teenagers to my boss's big party that's going on. And that was kind of the play that gave them an excuse to see if they could find younger kids that were underage, and to come and get purchased for the night.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the lines, and what I seem to be able to kind of gather from what's happening is this started really picking up and becoming women in couples ruse in like 2019. And so I heard it got really bad in 2020, and then the following years after that. And like you said, you can read all of this and people can make their own determination of what they believe about it. I'm with Glenn Beck on this, who's a very dear friend of Tim. I've been with them together on multiple occasions, and Glenn was very heartbroken, and he read through all the allegations, read through the papers, and he says, I hope it's not true, but I'm siding with the women on this. And I think when people read through that, you see some really common patterns that people need to just go read through and make their own decisions on that.
Yeah, the women, and I actually haven't even read through all of it, just very little, but as far as understanding how to work with trauma and be a guide and a coach in that, these women, first of all, have no reason to make and fabricate, one, and two, even things as simple as the alcohol portion and being told that you have to drink alcohol. Now, for a lot of these women, they are in a religion that's against the word of wisdom in the Mormon church. And so even something like that is so morally wrong to them. And that's very little compared to the many other things that they were told they needed to do. And I just can't help but think how mentally upsetting and traumatizing that can be, to be told to do something in, under the idea that you're saving children. I mean, imagine what you would do in that situation.
Yeah, it is traumatizing because Dr. Peter Levine has a fantastic definition of what trauma is. He says, and Gabor Mate shares a very similar definition. And when you combine them together, trauma is not the experience that you went through. It's what you made that experience mean about you.
Imagine, especially coming from that. And they're losing their marriages.
And so what are the stories that they're telling about themselves? Yes. How did I get in this situation?
Yes.
And I went through that.
Yeah.
And that trauma is not the experience they went through. It is what they made the experience mean about themselves.
Yeah. And as a sexual abuse survivor myself, that goes so deep in the sexual realm of femininity and what did I do to ask for this, and how could I have asked for that as a woman, and putting it all on myself or themselves, or the chastity around it, the morality around it. They are in for some very deep healing. And I hope that we can support them in that. And if anything, your voice in all this, I know will help those women not only get the healing, but also see, I mean, we haven't really talked about where you are now and the magical human you are now, and the gratitude that I have every time we interact, every time we talk, you just being in my life as a brother and a family member now, really, for who you are and how you've chosen to move through this traumatic event for yourself, and the hundreds and hundreds of people you help through your rewilding retreats, through musting medicine. And for them to be able to see that there's a space for them on the other side, and not just them, anyone in a space of victimhood, anyone in a space of trauma.
Yeah, if you have that story that you're telling about yourself. I was abused, therefore I'm abusable. And since I was abused, I must be worth abusing. These are what they call core wounded beliefs. We all have them.
Mm-hmm.
I went 4 decades without even knowing I had one.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out I have quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to rewrite that story of what I've made certain experiences mean about me, those are the things that pulled me away from they put me into parts. And so now when I'm looking at those stories, it's like, oh, this is where I believed that I was worth betraying, or this is where I believed that I wasn't good enough, or that I wasn't smart enough, or that I'm not choosable, right? And it doesn't matter where that experience came from. It matters that I adopted that story, and that became how I identified it. And so now these patterns had to show up in my life to prove to me, this is what you believe about you.
Yeah.
And so I needed those people like Tim to show me what I believed about me. I actually personally in the field don't feel like it had anything much to do with him, other than he had a soul contract with me to show me what I believed about me. And it was a pretty wounded thing. And now I've made peace with that part. And what's really miraculous and amazing is that I have an extremely safe community, that we all get to be human, but we are built on these 3 core pillars of authenticity, vulnerability, and accountability. And we have a core promise that runs through the foundation of all of that, which is to never weaponize anyone's vulnerabilities.
Powerful. And if you feel safe to do that, you restore wholeness.
You can look at anything, and then you can bring yourself back to your realization of your wholeness. And that's healing.
And in that aspect and perspective, everything has a place. Everything has a purpose.
Yeah, that is how benevolent this universe is.
Yeah.
The universe felt like the world, the earth experience felt like such a malevolent experience for me for so long. Because what it felt like is that it was so easy to get wounded, so easy to get traumatized, so easy to get betrayed. And it felt so near impossible to find any healing and any peace in it. And that would make this world a really, really malevolent place to live.
Yeah.
I think we live in a more beneficial world than we can even imagine. I think the benevolence of this universe and the way that it's all been created and intelligently designed is that it is so simple to find healing, even though it is very easy to get traumatized. To keep it all in harmony, it also has to be really simple to find healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the goal for that is the awareness, is the awareness in a dual reality. Yes. The awareness of that. And then we can have this excited experience on this earth of not only is everything working for us, but it's taking us closer and closer to our wholeness, to the gods within us, with no one above or below us, everything working in perfect tandem.
And that's the message that Jesus was giving. In the book of Luke, they were asking, so where is the kingdom of God? And I started thinking about this question, and it's for me, the way that my brain puts it together is, the first question is, where does God live? And for me, the answer is, well, he lives, he, she, whatever, right? God lives in the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is called that because that's where God lives. So then the question is, well, where is the kingdom of God located? And that's a question that Jesus answered. And he said, the kingdom of God is located within you. And so it's like, well, if God lives in the kingdom of God and the kingdom of God is in me, then I am God.
Yes.
And this is what got him killed. This was the blasphemous message that he had, because when he was working with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, like he was giving his message and they came and they would interrupt him all the time. And they said, so are you telling people that they're complete and they're whole and they're lacking no parts? And he says, know ye not that ye are gods? And what he's doing there is he's actually quoting Psalms 82:6. And Psalms 82:6 says, "Ye are gods, even children of the Most High gods." And he was quoting their scriptures, their text back to them, saying, I am telling people that they are gods and that they're complete in their whole and they're having a human experience. And your texts are telling them the same thing. And it's you that's not understanding your own scriptures.
Yeah.
And then they were like, okay, kill him. It's still a true message, though, today.
So true today. And so true is this circle that we're going on, this spiral of, oh, that's the truth. Oh, let's hide it. Let's kill it. Mm-hmm. Let's let go of it. Let's get let's get bitter in it. Let's betray it. But because of voices like yours and because of the awareness of where we've come from, it's not dying anymore. Mm-mm. It's waking up. There's a community out there that doesn't demonize or villainize vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Instead, we bring it, and it's not just about the next story, about the next guy who manipulated this. It's about voicing your wholeness from having to go through all of that to come to this path, to this place. And I'm so grateful and honored that you chose to speak it here.
Well, thanks for giving me a safe place to be able to speak it.
I love you so much. You can find Hugh at Mustang Medicine on Instagram. I'll put all of his links down, and I'm so honored. And if you haven't met him before, you're in for a treat because his magic and medicine are powerful. Love you so much.
Love you too. Thank you.
Thank you.